Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Proof of Conspiracy, How Trump's International Collusion is Threatening American Democracy by Seth Abramson. This is from the introduction. In late 2015, after Donald Trump has formally announced his candidacy for president, a geopolitical conspiracy emerges overseas, whose key participants are the leaders of Russia, Israel, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt. These 6 men decide that Trump is the antidote to their ills. For Russia, U.S. sanctions. For Israel, the lack of Arab allies. For Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt, perceived threats emanating from Iran. The conspirators commit themselves to doing whatever is necessary to ensure that Donald Trump is elected. Trump's presidential campaign is aware of and benefits from this conspiracy, both before and after the 2016 election. On March 19, 2018, British journalist David Hirst, the former chief foreign leader writer for The Guardian, publishes the most important report of his career. Hirst, at one time the Moscow bureau chief at The Guardian, is now editor-in-chief of his own publishing venture, a London-based Middle East watchdog called the Middle East Eye. In the spring of 2018, he reports the existence of a years-long, continent-spanning conspiracy that will eventually envelop the President of the United States. The Red Sea Conspiracy. This book denominates the conspiracy Hirst uncovers as the Red Sea Conspiracy for the simple reason that it is hatched on a yacht in the middle of the Red Sea, a seawater inlet of the Indian Ocean bordered by, among other countries, Saudi Arabia and Egypt. One imagines that in his many years as a correspondent and commentator for The Scotsman, The Huffington Post, Al Jazeera, El Arabi, Al Jaid, TRT World, which is Turkish, Masr al-Aghan, Egypt, and The Guardian, Hirst never thought he'd stumble on a story as far-reaching in its implications as the Red Sea Conspiracy. But he did, and what he found could change the course of history. This book chronicles the events around the globe that preceded and followed the fall 2015 origin of the conspiracy, with a special focus on how the conspiracy prompted Donald Trump and his aides, allies, and associates to covertly collude with 6 countries, both before and after the 2016 presidential election: Russia, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Israel, Bahrain, and Egypt. Events that began on the Red Sea in 2015 now influence President Trump's foreign policy toward all of these countries, toward other countries not involved in the conspiracy, such as Qatar and Iran, and more broadly toward Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. The story of the Red Sea Conspiracy begins with a man named George Nader. As reported by Hirst in the Middle East Eye, toward the end of 2015, Nader, then an advisor to the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, known as MBZ, convened, with his patron's permission, a summit of some of the Middle East's most powerful leaders. Gathered on a boat in the Red Sea in the fall of 2015 were Mohammed bin Salman, known as MBS, Deputy Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, who would shortly become the heir apparent to the throne of the Saudi Kingdom; MZB himself, by 2015 the de facto ruler of the United Arab Emirates; Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, the President of Egypt; Prince Salman bin Hamad, the Crown Prince of Bahrain; and King Abdullah II of Jordan. Nader, the improbable maestro of these rulers' clandestine get-together, intended the plan he posed to the men to include the nation of Libya, but no representative from that nation attended the gathering. Of the leaders aboard the yacht, 2, MBS and MBZ, are already close. According to a New Yorker interview with Richard A. Clarke, a counterterrorism advisor to Presidents Barack Obama and George W. Bush, MBS and MBZ, quote, talk on the phone all day to each other, end quote. The Red Sea meeting, although technically convened by Nader, is a means for MBZ to advance ambitions that he and MBS have designed together. The two Sunni Arab leaders' intention, Hearst records, is to remake the Middle East with the covert assistance of a highly placed American politician. They intend to do this by first renaming and reconstituting the membership of the six-member Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC, which in 2015 comprises Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, and Qatar, while reorienting, too, its regional ambitions and global alliances. The proposed GCC realignment would evict Kuwait, Oman, and Qatar from the Council and replace these three countries with Egypt, Jordan, and Libya, thereby eliminating the entity's historical association with the Persian Gulf and remaking it as, instead, an alliance constituting, quote, an elite regional group of 6 countries which would supplant the GCC and form the nucleus of a coalition of pro-U.S. and pro-Israeli states in the Middle East, end quote. According to 2 sources briefed on the 2015 Red Sea Summit, quote, Nader said this group of states could become a force in the region that the United States government could depend on to counter the influence of Turkey and Iran, end quote. Prior to 2015, Turkey and Saudi Arabia had intermittently enjoyed strong diplomatic ties.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy Tuesday. Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. There's a lot going on right now. The Supreme Court is hearing arguments, or just finished hearing arguments, actually, on DACA. And this points, I think, to a larger principle that we all need to have a conversation about, which is, what is the Republican Party anymore? DACA, President Obama said to, roughly 800,000 young people who were brought to this country as children, probably the majority of them brought to this country before they even spoke a language. This is the only country they know. And many, if not most of them, don't even speak Spanish, and I'm not sure if it's most, but many. I mean, and basically, our country made a promise to these children, and said, if you will give us all this information about yourself, about your family, basically implicating their parents in the quote crime of bringing their children into the country undocumented, if you'll give us all this information, we will protect you. We will defer action. That's the first 2 letters of DACA. We're going to defer that action. We're going to protect you. And when the federal government, when the United States government makes a promise to people, it should keep it. I mean, is it so important to Donald Trump that to keep America white, that he's got to kick these kids? I mean, that's the essence of this. The Southern Poverty Law Center has just released a whole bunch of emails, over 800 emails that Stephen Miller sent to an editor at Breitbart back in 2015 and 2016. And this is, when he was working with the Trump campaign and before he was working with the Trump campaign. And there was this woman, Katie McHugh, who was an editor for Breitbart from April 2014 to June 2017. She was a right-winger. She was anti-immigrant. She was anti-persons of color, right across the spectrum. She was anti-Muslim. I guess, kind of white nationalist incorporates all those things. And then she repudiated it, right? She got fired from Breitbart in 2017, and she said, no, that's not me. And she started turning these emails that she had from Stephen Miller over to Hate Watch, Southern Poverty Law Center's, Hate Watch is the name of their program. And, this is from their press release. Hate Watch exposes the racist source material that has influenced Miller's visions of policy, includes white nationalist webs. This is the stuff that Stephen Miller was emailing this editor at Breitbart. White nationalist websites, white genocide-themed novel in which Indian men rape white women, xenophobic conspiracy theories, and eugenics-era immigration laws that Adolf Hitler praised in Mein Kampf. 900 previously unknown emails. I'm surprised it's not, in the news, in the media. But the bottom line here is that you have to ask the question. I mean, outside of white nationalism and standing for billionaires, what does the Republican Party stand for? What is the Republican Party anymore? I mean, yeah, they throw a bone to white Christian evangelicals. Yes, we're going to keep your tax exempt status even if you engage in political activity. That was Trump's big pitch, right? We're going to do away with or just ignore the Johnson Amendment. This was a law that was passed back in the 1950s that said that if a church wants to be tax exempt, they can't participate in politics, basically. Stick to religion and we'll pay for your police and fire. No problem. Now, frankly, I have a problem with that, but that's a whole other conversation. But, that's the deal that we made with the churches, and they've been breaking that deal for the last decade or two. And Trump has just gone whole in on this. So, it's a transactional thing. So, as Donald Trump, I think the Republican Party is dead. And, what's going to replace it is like a really good question. Because it's either going to be it is going to reinvent itself as the Trump party, and it largely is right now. It's doing this. In other words, it reinvents itself as the party of tax cuts for billionaires, deregulation for polluting industries, hate on steroids for anybody who's not white or Christian or both, and power. I mean, this is what is going. We're going to, tomorrow is the beginning of the public hearings, the impeachment hearings, and this whole shtick that Donald Trump is running, that has been running all along, these various crimes that he has committed, and now it turns out, Rick Perry goes over to Ukraine and says, we're concerned about corruption here in Ukraine. By the way, can you give a gas contract to one of my biggest donors? Honest to God. And the donor gets this contract and makes millions and millions of dollars in Ukraine, or is prepared to, or ready to, or will be soon, or whatever. And that's, this was Rick Perry's thing. We don't like corruption, which is code for, we want you to make some dirt on Joe Biden, as you know. But I think that the Republican Party has no core values beyond those ones that I just articulated. This is it. I mean, when my dad was a Republican, the old Eisenhower Republicans, I think they're all gone. I think they're all dead. I know, and they had principles. They were not, by and large, screaming racists or homophobes or fearful of immigrants and things like that. I mean, Dwight Eisenhower got reelected in 1956 bragging that he had strengthened Social Security, he had added millions of people to the rolls, he'd added more and more people to labor unions. I mean, the Republican Party used to just be, we sort of like rich people, but we also like a middle class, and we just think that, change should happen slowly, sort of. But, maybe this is just inevitable, because the Republican Party has basically always been the party of business. It's just that back in my dad's day, it was the party of Main Street business, and now it's the party of oligarch business. I mean, they just kind of shifted their focus slightly. And then they'll yell about abortion and guns and LGBT people and immigrants to bring in the rubes, to bring in the haters. I mean, Stephen Miller, his job appears to be electoral outreach, really. Let's trash people who aren't white. I mean, if you're a Republican and you're listening to me right now, and you can tell me what the Republican Party stands for anymore, give me a call, 202-808-9925, because I can't figure it out. And there's just this complete betrayal of our principles. Principle number one, you make a promise to your people as a government, you keep that promise. What Trump should be doing is saying, okay, I don't like the DACA program. I don't want any more, illegals to become citizens of the United States or even have a path to it or even have safety in this country. So I'm not going to allow any more people into it. I mean, that would at least have some consistency, some principle to it, because it would respect the fact that we had made this promise to these roughly 800,000 kids. But just to say, oh, yeah, as a country, we said this to you, and you gave us all this information that could be used against you and your extended family, and now we're going to betray that promise. It's just like the promise that we made to Ukraine, that we would provide them with material support, in their conflict with Russia. It's like the commitment that we made to Iran and 5 other countries that helped us negotiate the Iran nuclear deal. We made a commitment. Trump says, we don't have a commitment. And now Iran is like, enriching uranium like there's no tomorrow. Or the commitment that we made to the rest of the world, a movement that we helped lead with regard to the Paris Accords, that we would, as a country, we would, stand with science and try to reduce our carbon emission footprint. So, it's just straightforward stuff. These were all commitments that the United States made. These were all agreements that we made. And we have, and this administration said, screw it. This stuff doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. There's a difference between changing policy and breaking your word. Just a very simple, straightforward difference. And what we have right now is we're breaking our word. And in item after item after item, it's the betrayal of our principles. And now you've got, Republicans saying, well, you can't impeach Trump because we all know he's crooked. You just can't impeach him for being crooked. Seriously, this is, where's the story? Here it is right here. This was Congressman Mac Thornberry on ABC's This Week. This was, I guess, Sunday. And he says, and I quote, "There's not really anything that the president said in that phone call that's different than what he says in the public all the time. So is there some sort of abuse of power that rises to the threshold that is different than the American people have been hearing for 3 years? I didn't hear that." In other words, Trump's been crooked all along. Trump has been lying to us all along. Now you're going to impeach him? That's essentially what this Republican is saying. What happened to principles? Rick Gates, by the way, testifying at Roger Stone's trial, says that after Trump got off the phone with Roger Stone, he told Gates that more WikiLeaks damaging stuff to Hillary was coming, because Roger Stone had been talking to WikiLeaks. Well, Trump, in writing and under oath, testified to the Mueller grand jury that he never had that conversation. So either Gates and Manafort are lying, and yet, Trump seemed to know about all this. He was talking about, all this stuff is just like out there. And then on top of that, we find out that a bunch of Trump's buddies are like making off with literally millions of dollars from the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Honest to God, they're bleeding Medicare. We'll be back. It's 18 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
The Democratic Party stands for, right? It's always stood for things like Social Security, workers' rights, a clean environment. What does the Republican Party stand for? I can't figure this out. And welcome back. Helen in Fairmont, West Virginia. Hey, Helen, what's on your mind today?
Well, I'm just so discouraged. Who do our children have to look up to anymore? No
I think
one.
there's a lot of good Democrats that our kids can look up to. I just don't see anybody in the Republican Party who is acting with any integrity. Mitt Romney even came out and gave a tepid little speech about how bad Donald Trump was, and then he kind of went back into his burrow.
Yes, I agree with that, but I don't know what has happened to Lindsey Graham. Maybe, I don't know, maybe he's lost his mind, too.
I don't think Lindsey Graham ever had principles. I think he was always, there are some kinds of people who just like want to be wingmen. They want to be somebody's buddy. If it was severe, you'd call it borderline personality disorder, that he doesn't really know who he is. And so he defines himself by the people that he associates himself with. So when John McCain was alive, Lindsey Graham became kind of John McCain's alter ego. John McCain dies. Who's the most powerful guy around in the Republican Party? Donald Trump. Lindsey Graham becomes Donald Trump. When Donald Trump is gone, if Mitt Romney gets elected president, Lindsey Graham will become like Mitt Romney, in my opinion, Helen.
I don't know, but I know it all makes me sick, and I believe Harry Truman had a sign on his desk or something that says the buck stops here.
He did.
And also, I would like to say that the immigrants, we need good immigration policy.
Yes.
DACA needs to be honored. And I have an ex-Iranian son-in-law, and I have a grandson-in-law who is a Mexican. I think the only way this is ever going to end is to get all these racist and nasty people out of office.
Yeah. Having a racist in the White House is extremely problematic for a multicultural, multi-ethnic society, and that's what's going on. But it's like that's not even his principal animating cause or principle. I mean, the main thing that seems to animate Donald Trump is money. Is how much money can he get? And then Rick Perry, the same deal. He goes over to Ukraine to talk about corruption, and instead he cuts a deal. He gets one of his biggest campaign donors, a multi-million-dollar deal with a Ukrainian gas company. I mean, President Zelensky of Ukraine has got to think that we're the most corrupt country on earth. It's just incredible, and I don't see how this is anything other than, just a clear statement of what the Republican Party isn't anymore. And I'm not sure that it really ever was, other than during the era of Abraham Lincoln. But it seems that maybe it was even in the in fact, I would say probably largely was in the 1880s that the Republican Party started aggressively selling out to big money, to the Jay Goulds of the world, and to the oil barons, the Rockefellers, the Mellons, the steel Carnegie, the steel barons, all these guys, they all bought into and basically owned a piece of the Republican Party. Helen, thank you for the call. Your comments are spot on. It's 22 minutes past the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. What is the Republican Party anymore? I'm trying to figure this out. Nikki Haley seems to have some ideas about that. I'll tell you about that after the break. Stick around. It's 22 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Now at ThomHartmann.com. Okay, so what is the Republican Party all about? Nikki Haley has this book out now. And what's so weird is that the single essential point of the book appears to be, at least from all, I have not read the book yet, but from all the coverage, from the interviews that she's doing, people who have read it, who are asking her questions, op-eds, things like that, the essence of it seems to be that two of the most powerful people in the Trump administration the Chief of Staff and the Secretary of State seemed to believe that Donald Trump was a threat to our country. Now, and you know, the essence of her book is, you know, they didn't like Trump, and I stood up for Trump, and I helped out. Now, Tillerson is pushing back, Rex Tillerson. He's saying, you know, Nikki Haley really wasn't even in these meetings that I had with Trump. She doesn't know what she's talking about. And I never said that. But, you know, Nikki Haley, what she's trying to do right now, in my opinion, is bump Mike Pence off the 2020 Republican ticket. She wants to get Donald Trump to dump Mike Pence for her. And frankly, it probably politically would be a very smart thing to do. She's in tight with Christian fundamentalists. She's you know, a woman. She's a person of color. She's Indian ancestry. She's smart. She's articulate. She looks good on television. I mean, she's got all those things that you know, central casting, send us a candidate for vice president. But what's there in terms of policy? What's there in terms of humanity? I mean, to throw your lot in with Donald Trump and Stephen Miller and these guys, and, oh, no, it's all fine, it's all good. They're you know, Jet here says she has become one of Trump's cagiest defenders. She's clearly decided that fasting herself to Trump is the best way to secure success going forward, which kind of makes my original point, which is that the Republican Party is dead. And it's now the party of grifters. It's the party of Donald Trump, and he's a grifter. He's a con man. He's been convicted of being a con man. He paid a $20 million fine for being a con man. And that was, you know, years ago. He paid another $2 million fine this, you know, just in the last couple of weeks for being a con man with his phony charity. This has become the Republican, and Rick Perry goes over and shakes down Ukraine. And then we've got this, at least 8 former White House presidential transition and campaign officials for Trump were hired as outside contractors. This is by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. I'll tell you about this story after the break, and I'll pick up your phone calls. What is the Republican Party? It's looking to me like it's just one giant con.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be right back. It's 28 minutes past the hour. Coming up on Stick Around. Today we're reading from David Blight's book, Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom. This is from the introduction. In his speech at the dedication of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., September 24, 2016, President Barack Obama delivered what he termed a, quote, clear-eyed view of a tragic and triumphant history of black Americans in the United States. He spoke of a history that is central to the larger American story, one that is both contradictory and extraordinary. He likened the African American experience to the infinite depths of Shakespeare and Scripture. The, quote, embrace of truth as best we can know it, said the president, is, quote, where real patriotism lies. Naming some of the major pivots of the country's past, Obama wrapped up his central theme in a remarkable sentence about the Civil War era. Quote, we've buttoned up our Union blues to join the fight for our freedom. We've railed against injustice for decade upon decade, a lifetime of struggle and progress and enlightenment that we see etched in Frederick Douglass's mighty leonine gaze, end quote. How Americans react to Douglass's gaze, indeed how we gaze back at his visage, and more important, how we read him, appropriate him, or engage his legacies, informs how we use our past to determine who we are. Douglass's life and writing emerged from nearly the full scope of the 19th century, representative of the best and the worst in the American spirit. Douglass constantly probed the ironies of America's contradictions over slavery and race. Few Americans use Shakespeare and the Bible to comprehend his story and that of his people as much as Douglass. And there may be no better example of an American radical patriot than the slave who became a lyrical prophet of freedom, natural rights, and human equality. Obama channeled Douglass in his dedication speech, knowingly or not. So do many people today. Born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, a slave, in Talbot County, Maryland, in February 1818, the future Frederick Douglass was the son of Harriet Bailey, one of 5 daughters of Betsy Bailey, and with some likelihood his mother's white owner. He saw his mother for the last time in 1825, though he hardly knew her. She died the following year. Douglass lived 20 years as a slave and nearly 9 years as a fugitive slave subject to recapture. From the 1840s to his death in 1895, he attained international fame as an abolitionist, editor, orator of almost unparalleled signature, and the author of 3 autobiographies that are classics of the genre. As a public man, he began his abolitionist career 2 decades before America would divide and fight a civil war over slavery that he openly welcomed. Douglass was born in a backwater of the slave society of the South, just as steamboats appeared in bays and on American rivers, and before the telegraph, the railroad, and the rotary press changed human mobility and consciousness. He died after the emergence of electric lights, the telephone, and the invention of the phonograph. The renewed orator and traveler loved and used most of these elements of modernity and technology. Douglass was the most photographed American of the 19th century, explained in this book, and especially by the intrepid research of 3 other scholars I write upon. Although it can never really be measured, he may also have been, along with Mark Twain, the most widely traveled American public figure of his century. By the 1890s, in sheer miles and countless number of speeches, he had few rivals as a lecturer in the golden age of oratory. It is likely that more Americans heard Frederick Douglass speak than any other public figure of his time. Indeed, to see or hear Douglass became a kind of wonder of the American world. He struggled as well with the pleasures and perils of fame as much as anyone else in his century, with the possible exceptions of General Ulysses S. Grant or P.T. Barnum. Douglass's dilemma with fame was a matter of decades, not merely of moments, and fraught with racism. The orator and writer lived to see and interpret black emancipation, to work actively for women's rights long before they were achieved, to realize the civil rights triumphs and tragedies of Reconstruction, and to witness and contribute to America's economic and international expansion in the Gilded Age. He lived to the age of lynching and Jim Crow laws, when America collapsed into retreat from the real victories and revolutions in race relations that he had helped to win. He played a pivotal role in America's second founding out of the apocalypse of the Civil War, and he very much wished to see himself as a founder and defender of the Second American Republic. In one lifetime of anti-slavery, literary, and political activism, Douglass was many things, and the set of apparent paradoxes makes his story so attractive to biographers, as well as to so many constituencies today. He was a radical thinker and a proponent of classic 19th century political liberalism. At different times, he hated and loved his country. He was a ferocious critic of the United States and all its hypocrisies, but also, after emancipation, became a government bureaucrat, a diplomat, and a voice for territorial expansion. He strongly believed in self-reliance and demanded an activist interventionist government at all levels to free slaves, defeat the Confederacy, and to protect black citizens against terror and discrimination. Douglass was a serious constitutional thinker, and few Americans have ever analyzed race with more poignancy and nuance than this mostly self-taught genius with words. He was a radical editor, writer, and activist. The book Frederick Douglass by David Blight.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And not only did Rick Perry's buddies, this was, what's his name? Michael Bleiser and Alex Cranberg. Not only did these guys get a contract to drill for oil and gas in Ukraine, 2 of Rick Perry's big donors, but the bid that they made to Ukraine, the amount of money that they offered Ukraine as a percentage of the revenue that they would get from the gas and oil that they're drilling out, was lower than a bid than any of the other people are bidding. In other words, Ukraine screwed themselves. They chose the lowest bidder, and and it should have been the highest bidder because it's money coming into the country, not going out of the country. And then there's another piece to this. I know I said I'd pick up your phone calls right now, but I just want to get this rant out. Right? There's also a cult that has formed within the Republican Party around Trump. And, the latest evidence of this is Sean Spicer on Dancing with the Stars. The guy doesn't know how to dance. There's a bunch of really talented people who do. And they should be being moved up through the food chain of Dancing with the Stars. But the people who love Trump keep voting for Sean Spicer because he keeps saying how much he loves Trump. And so he's got this cult, that is promoting. I mean, it's nuts. And now, the latest shtick is, it's just a phone call. Well, no, it's not just a phone call. This is something that's been going on for a year, maybe longer. This is a long con. This is bribery and extortion. Let's just call it exactly what it is. And then here, this, Seema Verma is the person who's the director of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Your Medicare and our nation's Medicare and Medicaid dollars at work, right? And she's hiring all these people who were, this one guy used to be a consultant, an Indiana-based consultant to Mike Pence. Oh, excuse me. Seema Verma used to be an Indiana-based consultant to Mike Pence. And one of her buddies, Marcus Barlow, billed $425,000 for a year's work as a consultant to Seema Verma for personal brand and strategic communication support. Millions and millions of dollars going to Trumpsters and Pensters. I mean, it's like, what has happened? Anyhow, Mark in Valley, Washington. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind? Mark?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're on the air, Mark.
Yeah, you're asking what the Republican Party's turned into.
Yeah, or what it stands for.
Well, I think they've just accepted that they're fascist. They've been flirting with it since the 30s. And, fascists are pro-corporate, pro-power. I think
I mean, the old-fashioned definition of fascism, the dictionary definition, literally, is the merger of corporate and state interests combined with belligerent nationalism. So, yeah, we certainly have that. It certainly seems that way. Thanks a lot for the call. Jamie in Nacogdoches, Texas?
Yes. Hey, Tom.
Hi, Jamie. What's up?
Oh, God. Well, I just heard you talking about what's his name on Dancing with the Stars.
Yeah, Sean
That
Spicer.
really wasn't what my conversation was in the beginning.
Uh-huh.
But I watched Dancing with the Stars the last episode last year, and this he was country music radio announcer. Mm-hmm. And he won and couldn't dance. He was poor. Now Spicer's in there, and they've eliminated this unless they change their rules up. That's the end of my watching Dancing with the Stars.
Well, I've never seen the show, so.
But I'm in my 80s, and I wanted to talk to you about Rick Perry.
Mm-hmm.
But when he
You're
was
a Texan. He was your governor.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, and I'm a rare Democrat.
In Texas, yeah.
Yeah. But am I right that when he was running for president, on the stage, did he not have three things he was going to eliminate?
Yes.
And he couldn't remember the third one.
Right, and wasn't the third one energy, the one that he's running?
Exactly.
Yeah, so there you go.
And it's just amazing to me. Now, one only good thing I can say about him, he's easy on the eye to look at.
Yeah. Well, he's you know, being a handsome man. That increasingly that seems to be like the criteria for Republicans. You know, and this is what I was saying about Nikki Haley. I mean, she's kind of central casting, but you know,
but listen to what comes out of their mouth.
Yeah,
that'll change your mind real quick.
Right, exactly, and that's where it gets dangerous. Jamie, thank you for the call. Michael in Princeton, Minnesota. Hey, Michael, what's up?
Yeah, Tom, I didn't know if you saw Rachel Maddow's show last night. It was all about the corruption and stuff. You know, they keep claiming that they're going over there and holding back the Javelin missiles
right.
and stuff. You know, because of corruption over there. They actually sent Rick Perry over there with 4 names to put onto the board for the Ukrainian oil company. And they turned around and wound up with a bid that came in millions of dollars for the Ukrainians, cheaper than what some of the other bids come in at.
Right. Perry basically went over there and did a hustle. I mean, he said to them, you know, you want your Javelin missiles, you want your military aid, then give my friends this oil contract. Give my donors this oil contract. It's like, oh my God, this is, and you know, Rick Perry has now basically said that, you know, he's leaving the administration, but and maybe it's because he doesn't want to go to jail. I mean, you know, look at 19 people went to jail from the Nixon administration. 19 people. And as I recall, and you just, I mean, look at people went to jail during the Reagan administration too. I mean, it's like Republican administrations are just insanely corrupt.
Now they're checking into whether you know, the legality of even holding back, because now we're understanding also that wasn't only the Javelin missiles, it was also humanitarian aid. And the legality of that is in question right now, and I hope that they find them guilty.
Yeah. This goes way beyond, you know, one phone call. Although that one phone call was damning enough. Michael, thank you. John in Los Angeles. Hey, John, what's up?
First off, let me say, Tom, I got love for you and plenty of respect for you.
But I can always tell when a butt is coming.
I'm sorry, but I'm a black man, and this country's always been a jerk. You're just now finding out.
Yeah, well, I get that, but you know, there was a time, John, when the Republican Party, I guess it was during Abraham Lincoln's time, you know, when the Republican Party.
That was what, 100+ years ago.
Yeah.
And let's think about this. It wasn't even the party itself. It was the abolitionists inside the party.
You're absolutely right.
That's what I'm saying. This country is built on the idiosyncrasy of I'll help you now and beat you with a stick later.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, John. You're absolutely right. John, thank you. Thank you for sharing that perspective. Jason in Winter Haven, Florida. Hey, Jason.
Hello. I was saying the reason why I'm a Democrat, not a Republican, is how the Republicans treated Clinton in the impeachment proceedings. While, Gingrich and Livingston were having affairs at about the same time that Clinton was doing a thing with Monica, I'm thinking, nope, can't go there. And what we have on Mr. Trump is about 1,000 times worse than anything that Clinton ever did. Yeah, and it turns out that every single one of the men who were leading the impeachment of Bill Clinton in the House of Representatives, Bob Livingston, Bob Barr, Newt Gingrich, every single one of them literally was getting it on with a mistress on the side during the time that they were impeaching Clinton for that. I mean, it's hypocrisy is like writ large in this party. Katie in Catalina, Arizona, or Kate, excuse me, in Catalina, Arizona. Hey, Kate, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Great show, always.
Thank you.
And I want to say kudos to Jefferson as well. I love it when you have him on. Tom, I just want to say I think we're sounding the death knell, possibly, for the Republican Party a little bit too prematurely. We were doing that. With the torture and his colossally corrupt presidency, the illegal war, and I think the Republican Party is dead. They can't recover from all this. They're going to The Hague. And then in came Obama, and W goes off to paint, pretty little pictures of his feet in the bathtub, and
I mean, it's and now they're rehabilitating this guy who lied us into wars that led to the death of thousands of Americans and hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people from the Middle East.
Yes. And, as far as what is the Republican Party all about, I am surrounded by these psychobillies. And they're about three things, and that's rifles, Bibles, and embryos. And I was at a neighborhood barbecue just recently with all of them. And they're still They're about four things, actually. And the fourth would be they are fueled by their hatred, their disgust with our perceived political correctness, our PC culture. They hate us for that. They're still ranting about Paula Dean. So
this is what we're all seeing, and it's like, okay, this is a political party. I mean, this is Kate, thank you for the call. But I have yet to hear from anybody saying, well, the Republican Party actually does have a legitimate purpose here. They stand for something meaningful. What? I can't find anything. Putting children in cages. I mean, is that what you stand for? It's 46 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's the place where smart people get their news. We'll be right back. 46 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Robert in Omaha, Nebraska. Hey, Robert, what's up?
Yes, I would just like to, I don't know, have you heard about the race happening in here in Nebraska between John Bacon and Cara Eastman?
I have not.
Okay, well, because Cara's the Democrat running, and I was checking my Facebook yesterday, and Cara, there was something bad that happened, and Cara was saying about how bad it was. And then these, one or two Republicans came on and started, in a way, I don't know, disrespecting her and trash-talking her, and I replied to one, and I said, wait, there was a bad thing that just happened. Why are you doing this? I mean,
right.
I thought you people were all about compassion, but the thing about it is I don't understand how they can do this and just be okay with doing it and not feel bad.
Well, it's this weird. These Republicans just say that they are pro-life, right? And we have to be so concerned about a zygote or an embryo, but once that baby is born, you're on your own, buddy. It's just that is the way it goes. It just absolutely goes that way. And, Robert, thank you for the call. Chaz in Lakewood, Washington. Hey, Chaz, what's up?
Na zdrowie, comrade, is another glorious damn Trumpistan.
There you go. It is.
Hey, I hope you and Louise had a good anniversary.
We did. We went to New York. We had a meeting with SiriusXM yesterday for lunch, lunch meeting, and then flew home last night. But we went to see Frozen on Broadway, which is supposed to be a show for little kids, and I absolutely loved it. It touched my heart. It's just a wonderful show.
You're making the rest of us husbands pale in comparison, Tom. You realize that, right?
We actually had a legitimate business reason for this trip.
So you can write it off, too.
There you go.
Hey, listen, I'm reading stories that are saying that a lot of Republicans are really leaving Congress, and 100 Republicans are departing politics, and I'm just wondering, is that an unusual number?
Yes.
Is there any significance to this?
The number of Republicans who have declared that they are not going to run for re-election, and I think it's in the 30s now, is the highest. I believe it's the highest in my lifetime. I could be wrong, but
there's a good chance that some of those will be replaced by Democrats, right?
Yes, yeah, and in fact, probably that's why some of them are leaving. It may be that others are just like they're sick by their party, and they're saying, okay, it's time to cash in. I'll go get that lobbying job that was promised me, or it's. Because
is that reflecting that their districts are tending to become a little more purple or even blue?
I think it's the whole country is as the Republican Party becomes Trumpified, it shrinks because there's only so much that you can do with fundamentalist Christianity based on racial identity, which is even weird in and of itself because Jesus wasn't a white guy, but. It's like that's.
Wait, whoa! You mean he wasn't a blonde, blue-eyed?
If he was the only one in Palestine at the time. Chaz, thanks a lot for the call. It's good to hear from you. What a day! It's just incredible what's going on here. And these Trump allies who are getting rich, Politico, busted Seema Verma on this thing. And is that in the news? No, because Trump is sucking up all the oxygen in the room. It's incredible. We'll be right back. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Hear all about it at ThomHartmann.com. Welcome back. Boy, what a time that we're living through. I mean, I just find this moment in history singularly amazing. Literally, we've never had somebody like this as president of the United States. Somebody this pathological. Somebody this essentially corrupt and destructive. I mean, certainly we've had corrupt presidents in the past, but I don't think we've ever seen anything like this. Rich in Central Willie, Washington. Hey, Rich, what's on your mind?
Well, first, I'd just like to throw this out there. Bombs for Bidens. It's the bombs for Bidens.
Bombs for Biden? What's that?
That would be my new name for what's going on with the Trump.
Oh, I see. Sure. In other words, we're Ukraine. We will give you bombs, actually missiles, if you give us dirt on Biden. I get it. Thanks.
Exactly. But my main topic was how my father's religion is killing my father's Republican Party, because you got to look at the majority of Protestantism in the United States is based on Calvinism, whether it's the old plantation theology or the modern day prosperity theology. Now, when you don't have prosperity, that don't sell no more.
Right.
When the economy starts to tank and people can figure out, well, this is Trump. It's turning down because of Trump. Or if they really look at it, the younger generation, they're smart enough to look this stuff up online, and they can see the trends where when Republicans are in power, wages tend to drop. The economy actually gets worse under Republicans, especially for the middle class and young people looking for
you could track that back to the 1890s. I mean,
I believe it. Yeah.
Literally, every Republican administration has. If you compare the growth of the stock market, if you compare the growth of wages, if you compare GDP, I mean, pretty much any measure, any metric you want to choose, compare Republican and Democratic administrations, and what you'll find is that Democratic administrations always do better than Republican administrations in all of those categories.
If they're out there trying to sell, we're the party of prosperity, religion, because we're good Christians, because you're good Christians, God's going to reward you with prosperity, and this is what they've been selling.
Yeah.
So when times get rough, people are going, hold it, this doesn't work. So it's the
the neo-Calvinism in your mind is collapsing, basically.
Yeah, and it's taken the Republican Party down with it because this is what they've been pushing for so long.
Yeah, I think you're right, Rich. I really do. I want to get a couple more calls in here. Thanks a lot for the call, Rich. Tim in Houston, Texas. Your thoughts, Tim?
Good morning.
Hey.
Tom, I was curious, since you're the big history buff, can you tell me about how the Republican Party was just prior to and after the Great Depression hit, like under Hoover? And right. I've got one other comment I'd like to make. George Lakoff, in his book, talks about there are really two types of people. Most of us between the two extremes. They're the conservatives and the progressives. And the conservatives being have to have a father figure type of a
right. Yeah, he uses the family
leader,
analogy.
And progressives. Yeah. No, the rest of we're equal. We're going to tell you.
Right.
We're it. So, can I get you to speak to those two topics for us?
Sure. Yeah. Lakoff's point was the Democrats tend to view the body politic, the polity, as family. We are all brothers, sisters. We're all related. We take care of each other. Republicans also view it as a family, but in a strict father model. Top down, hierarchical and patriarchal. With regard to the Republican Party back in the 1920s, Warren Harding in 1920, this is just post-World War I, and tax rates were really high. I think it was 91% after World War I. Warren Harding ran on a platform in the election of 1920 on deregulation and privatization and lower taxes. Less government and business, more business and government was his slogan. In other words, privatize and deregulate. And then, a return to normalcy was the other slogan that Warren Harding used in the 1920 election, which meant cut taxes back to where they used to be. And they did that. Right. He became president, and he deregulated Wall Street. He cut taxes. He just juiced the economy like there was no tomorrow, and it produced what we call the Roaring Twenties. Interestingly, during the Roaring Twenties, wages for working people were absolutely flat for that 10-year period. But, the wealth at the very top just exploded. And then, of course, it all blew up in 1929. But Harding
just like today,
right? And then Coolidge, following him, just kept those policies in place. And then Hoover, presided over the Great Depression, over the Great Crash. Tim, thanks for the call. It's good to hear from you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Proof of Conspiracy, How Trump's International Collusion is Threatening American Democracy by Seth Abramson. This is from the introduction. In late 2015, after Donald Trump has formally announced his candidacy for president, a geopolitical conspiracy emerges overseas, whose key participants are the leaders of Russia, Israel, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt. These 6 men decide that Trump is the antidote to their ills. For Russia, U.S. sanctions. For Israel, the lack of Arab allies. For Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt, perceived threats emanating from Iran. The conspirators commit themselves to doing whatever is necessary to ensure that Donald Trump is elected. Trump's presidential campaign is aware of and benefits from this conspiracy both before and after the 2016 election. On March 19, 2018, British journalist David Hurst, the former chief foreign leader writer for The Guardian, publishes the most important report of his career. Hurst, at one time the Moscow bureau chief at The Guardian, is now editor-in-chief of his own publishing venture, a London-based Middle East watchdog called the Middle East Eye. In the spring of 2018, he reports the existence of a years-long, continent-spanning conspiracy that will eventually envelop the President of the United States, the Red Sea Conspiracy. This book denominates the conspiracy Hurst uncovers as the Red Sea Conspiracy for the simple reason that it is hatched on a yacht in the middle of the Red Sea, a seawater inlet of the Indian Ocean bordered by, among other countries, Saudi Arabia and Egypt. One imagines that in his many years as a correspondent and commentator for The Scotsman, The Huffington Post, Al Jazeera, El Arabi, El Jaid, TRT World, which is Turkish, Masr al-Aghan, Egypt, and The Guardian, Hurst never thought he'd stumble on a story as far-reaching in its implications as the Red Sea Conspiracy. But he did, and what he found could change the course of history. This book chronicles the events around the globe that preceded and followed the fall 2015 origin of the conspiracy, with a special focus on how the conspiracy prompted Donald Trump and his aides, allies, and associates to covertly collude with 6 countries, both before and after the 2016 presidential election: Russia, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Israel, Bahrain, and Egypt. Events that began on the Red Sea in 2015 now influence President Trump's foreign policy toward all of these countries, toward other countries not involved in the conspiracy, such as Qatar and Iran, and more broadly toward Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. The story of the Red Sea Conspiracy begins with a man named George Nader. As reported by Hurst in the Middle East Eye, toward the end of 2015, Nader, then an advisor to the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, known as MBZ, convened, with his patron's permission, a summit of some of the Middle East's most powerful leaders. Gathered on a boat in the Red Sea in the fall of 2015 were Mohammed bin Salman, known as MBS, Deputy Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, who would shortly become the heir apparent to the throne of the Saudi kingdom; MZB himself, by 2015 the de facto ruler of the United Arab Emirates; Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, the president of Egypt; Prince Salman bin Hamad, the Crown Prince of Bahrain; and King Abdullah II of Jordan. Nader, the improbable maestro of these rulers' clandestine get-together, intended the plan he posed to the men to include the nation of Libya, but no representative from that nation attended the gathering. Of the leaders aboard the yacht, 2, MBS and MBZ, are already close. According to a New Yorker interview with Richard A. Clarke, a counterterrorism advisor to Presidents Barack Obama and George W. Bush, MBS and MBZ, quote, talk on the phone all day to each other, end quote. The Red Sea meeting, although technically convened by Nader, is a means for MBZ to advance ambitions that he and MBS have designed together. The 2 Sunni Arab leaders' intention, Hurst records, is to remake the Middle East with the covert assistance of a highly placed American politician. They intend to do this by first renaming and reconstituting the membership of the 6-member Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC, which in 2015 comprises Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, and Qatar, while reorienting, too, its regional ambitions and global alliances. The proposed GCC realignment would evict Kuwait, Oman, and Qatar from the Council and replace these 3 countries with Egypt, Jordan, and Libya, thereby eliminating the entity's historical association with the Persian Gulf and remaking it as, instead, an alliance constituting, quote, an elite regional group of 6 countries which would supplant the GCC and form the nucleus of a coalition of pro-U.S. and pro-Israeli states in the Middle East, end quote. According to 2 sources briefed on the 2015 Red Sea Summit, quote, Nader said this group of states could become a force in the region that the United States government could depend on to counter the influence of Turkey and Iran, end quote. Prior to 2015, Turkey and Saudi Arabia had intermittently enjoyed strong diplomatic ties. The book Proof of Conspiracy by Seth Abramson. For our book club today, we're reading from David Blight's book, Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom. This is from the introduction. In his speech at the dedication of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., September 24, 2016, President Barack Obama delivered what he termed a, quote, clear-eyed view of a tragic and triumphant history of black Americans in the United States. He spoke of a history that is central to the larger American story, one that is both contradictory and extraordinary. He likened the African American experience to the infinite depths of Shakespeare and Scripture. The, quote, embrace of truth as best we can know it, said the president, is, quote, where real patriotism lies. Naming some of the major pivots of the country's past, Obama wrapped up his central theme in a remarkable sentence about the Civil War era. Quote, we've buttoned up our Union blues to join the fight for our freedom. We've railed against injustice for decade upon decade, a lifetime of struggle and progress and enlightenment that we see etched in Frederick Douglass's mighty leonine gaze, end quote. How Americans react to Douglass's gaze, indeed how we gaze back at his visage, more important, how we read him, appropriate him, or engage his legacies, informs how we use our past.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And on the line with us is Guillaume Long. Guillaume is the former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ecuador in the government of Rafael Correa. He's now a policy analyst with the Center for Economic Policy and Research. CEPR.net is their website. Guillaume, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you very much for having me on.
Thank you for joining us. What is going on in Bolivia? It seems that, well, actually, rather than my telling you what I'm confused about, let me just ask you right from the where did this start? I thought Morales was very popular among the people of Bolivia. I heard that he was trying to run for president again when the Constitution didn't allow that, and he was trying to change that. But I really don't know much beyond that. And now I'm also reading pieces about this shadowy group of right-wing and fundamentalist Christian billionaires who are trying to force him out. What's going on there?
Well, I think what's happened in Bolivia has to be called by its name. We've just had a coup. You're right to say that Morales is a popular figure amongst Bolivians. Even after 13 and a half years of rule, he still, in the last elections, was the candidate who came in first place. We can talk about that in a minute. There's been some talk about whether there were some irregularities in the elections. We've been very critical of that narrative. We've analyzed the elections at the CPR, and we found no irregularities. But regardless of that, you still, whether there were irregularities or not, is still on 47% of the electoral vote, which is, almost half, 1 in 2 Bolivians voted for him, and his closest contender was 10 points below. So you're right to say he is very popular. His term hadn't come to an end, so he was still the constitutional president, and he was toppled. It was a mixture of factors, so you're right to say that there was some sort of elite-based, actually vigilante, very far-right groups linked to some evangelist groups as well, who were calling for his demise. Then there was a police uprising, mutiny, if you like, and finally the high command of the military asking for him to resign. I mean, when the high command of the armed forces asks a president, constitutional sitting elected president, to resign, that's pretty much what the closest you get to a textbook coup. I think that's what's happening in Bolivia.
The headline over at the Gray Zone: Bolivia coup led by Christian fascist paramilitary leader and multimillionaire with foreign support. Pictures of this guy, and then here's this quote from Luis Fernando Camacho. stormed into Bolivia's abandoned presidential palace in the hours after President Morales left with a Bible in one hand and a national flag in the other, bowed his head in prayer. There's a photo of it, in fact. And he says, Pachamama will never return to the palace. Bolivia belongs to Christ. Is this about religion, or is this just one particular guy who was part of the coup?
Well, I mean, it's a particular guy that's part of a coup, but he's representative of a number of sectors, particularly from the east of the country. So there's also an ethnic dimension to this. The eastern lowlands have had an anti-indigenous, an anti-indigenous agenda. I mean, but let's not forget that Morales is the first indigenous president in Bolivia's history, which has a majority indigenous population. And there's been an ongoing issue with a group of people in the east, particularly, again, from the elites, even at some point having a separatist agenda, right? Wanting to separate directly from Bolivia. This is one of the issues leading to the diplomatic problems, actually, between Evo Morales' government and the United States. There have been no exchange of ambassadors between the U.S. and Bolivia since 2009 because the Bolivian government in 2008 accused the United States of being behind these separatist groups. So there are a number of issues, but certainly the person you mentioned, Camacho, very far-right character, who wasn't even a candidate in the elections, right? It's important to bear in mind that this leader of the coup wasn't even a candidate in the elections. Has sort of been leading this hodgepodge mix of different actors, but basically from the hardcore right wing of Bolivia to topple the president.
So what does this mean for the region? What does this mean for the fate and future of the Americas? What impact could this have on the United States? And when President Morales first accused the United States of basically messing in his country, was he accusing our government, or was he accusing right-wing billionaires in the United States who were funding those folks? I mean, was it being, because that was during the Obama administration, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's always difficult. The relationship between Latin American states and the United States is a complex one. And we're not going to go into much detail here, but it's not just the administration, right? The United States is a complex, very large, complex state with all sorts of agencies and more or less deep institutions and less deep institutions and so on and so forth. So you're dealing not just with a president, you're dealing with a long history of the United States, even in its national security doctrine, considering Latin America as a docile backyard, which is part of the problem, because it means you're having recurrent forms of nationalism questioning that domination, that hegemony on behalf of the United States. And so, the first decade and a half of the 21st century, you had a series of progressive leftist governments in Latin America questioning that domination, and certainly Evo Morales was one of them. He nationalized his natural gas. He did a lot of pro-poor policies. He reduced extreme poverty in Bolivia, which was one of the highest, certainly in the Americas, maybe even in the world, from 40% of Bolivians being in extreme poverty to 17% of Bolivians being in extreme poverty. So that's also why he's very popular. But again, with a lot of redistribution, a lot of the kinds of policies that the Bolivian elites, strongly allied to the United States, didn't necessarily like. What this means for the region, at the moment we're seeing really tragic hours in the region. After years of democratization, we're seeing the advance of authoritarian practices, a lot of political prisoners here, there, and everywhere, and political persecution.
Not just Bolivia.
Not just Bolivia, you're seeing Mexico playing its erstwhile role that it used to play in the 60s and the 70s when we had military dictatorships in Latin America. And now a lot of Mexican embassies in the region, including in my country in Ecuador, but also now in Bolivia, receiving all these people fleeing political repression. So it's kind of a real flashback to the 60s and the 70s, the Cold War. Things are very difficult right now in Latin America. It's very polarized between right and left.
So
what's happened in Bolivia is a consequence of that.
So might we be seeing the beginning of the reemergence of El Salvador under the Reagan administration is the one that most vividly sticks in my mind, particularly after John Negroponte went down there, and suddenly death squads started happening, and people started showing up with their hands tied behind their backs and a bullet in the back of their heads. And well, yeah. Is that the direction that we're seeing this part of South America go?
I mean, we're certainly trying to avoid this. I think the people on the political left who were once in power have shown that they want to compete democratically. They want to be allowed to play by the democratic constitutional rule book. Right. A lot of what's happened in Latin America has been trying to protend these progressive leaders from being able to compete democratically. Think about Lula, who was jailed on bogus charges in Brazil, the former president of Brazil, jailed on bogus charges because he was first in the polls and not by a meager lead, 20, 30 points ahead of the current president. Right. So they managed to keep him out. Think of Rafael Correa in Ecuador, who's now in exile because he's the most popular president, politician rather, in Ecuador, and so they don't want him on Ecuadorian territory. They would lock him up, So all these things which were for my generation, certainly, this is a new element. We've been used to certainly an imperfect democracy with all sorts of problems, with issues of political instability, but not this return of this kind of repression that belongs to a previous generation, the generation of the Cold War, of the 60s, of the 70s, of the military coups. And yet we're seeing this now again. We're seeing it now over the weekend in Bolivia with the coup against Evo Morales. And we're seeing all sorts of authoritarian practices taking place in the region. So they're very troubling times. And I think it's important that the media in the world, in the Western world, in the U.S., calls things by their name. I mean, who can even doubt that there's been a coup? When the military says, sorry, we can't support you anymore, you have to quit.
That's a coup.
A textbook coup. Yeah.
We're talking to the former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ecuador, Guillaume Long, now a policy analyst with the Center for Economic Policy and Research, CEPR.net. Guillaume, we just have a minute or so here before we're going to have to hit a break. How do you expect this to shake out? Where is this going?
Right now there's a real vacuum in Bolivia because it was not just Evo Morales who quit, the president. It was also the vice president, the heads of the two chambers in Congress, so the Senate and the lower house. Everybody in the line of succession quit because they denounced the coup and they didn't want to be part of it. So now they're the military who are currently sort of, I suppose, the caretakers. There's no real government in Bolivia right now. The military are looking for the next in succession, but the next in succession could be 5, 6, 7 sort of layers down.
Are they sort of looking for their own Jair Bolsonaro, their own right-wing populist guy?
They already have Jair Bolsonaro, who's this Camacho guy who has been kind of leading the very far right. Right. Vigilante sort of coup with people in the streets. But now they need someone to organize elections, and everybody who was in the line of succession has quit. So they're going to have to, whichever way they do this, it's going to look bad. It's not going to be constitutional. It's a really sad day for Bolivian democracy, its institutions, and of course, Morales is in exile. He's just landed in Mexico now. 47% of Bolivians voted for him, so he still exists politically, and you're going to have half of the Bolivian population seriously unhappy about the coup.
Has the U.S. State Department said anything about this?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's an absolute endorsement of what they call democratization, and in fact, they use the word "we celebrate."
So so we are celebrating and endorsing a military coup in a nearby. That's amazing. Guillaume Long, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Great talking with you. It's fascinating stuff. And this, I'm seeing this basic worldwide trend of right-wing billionaires supporting right-wing populists. And I don't think it's a good thing for a small d democracy around the world. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Let's see here. Joe in Detour Village, Michigan? Is that serious?
Detour Village, Michigan.
Wow, I grew up in Michigan. I've never heard of that.
We're right next to Drummond Island. You got to go through us to get to Drummond Island.
Oh, my goodness. Okay. So what's on your mind, Joe?
I don't know what for sure this says about Mike Pence, but a few weeks ago he visited Mackinac Island to do a fundraiser.
Yeah.
You know, the Mackinac group. Anyway, no cars are allowed on Mackinac Island. They haven't been since 1890. He went ahead and floundered that rule, even when presidents haven't, and brought 7 SUVs onto the island against local protests. Does that say that he knows he's not on the ticket, or they just figured Michigan doesn't matter? Because, oh, my goodness, did that upset a lot of people.
Did that, I mean, Mackinac Island is kind of sacred land for Michiganders.
Yeah.
It's
yes,
on the one hand.
Is.
On the other hand, it's up. It's as north as you can go, and it's between the Lower Peninsula and the Upper Peninsula, and so people in the major population areas of Michigan, Grand Rapids South, I would say. Probably most of them have never been to Mackinac Island and don't know that much about it. I mean, was there a generalized sense of outrage across the state, or was it just among people?
Oh yeah, for a couple of days we were hearing it because I do MLive out of Kalamazoo still, and it was on there. Yeah, a lot of people were pretty upset, and the thing is, that's not going to help any of his candidates up here, even if it doesn't matter to him.
Yeah. Do you know what he was raising money for? So he went to meet with basically this is the DeVos crowd, the
somewhere on the island there. We don't know who he was even meeting.
Yeah, and they're tied in with the Kochs and all that kind of stuff. Amazing, amazing. Yeah. Thank you very much, Joe, for the call. I appreciate it. Frank in Staten Island, New York. Hey Frank, what's up?
Good afternoon. It's kind of like a brain overload. Every time you see a little tidbit of the president at one of his rallies, and you see those people behind him, I mean, these are the people that believe that Hillary Clinton was running a sex ring in the basement of a pizzeria. And all the president has to do is label any of the Democratic candidates as a socialist, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, and these are like 140 character mindsets that basically, I don't know if it's true, but I believe it's true,
Right.
And so how do you convince these people or anybody that, critical thinking, we kind of lost that along the way.
Yeah.
It's just a whole bunch of brain overload.
I think it has to do with this, the conservative mindset has to do with feeling safe. And there's a lot of research that points to this, and in fact, I'll talk about it a little bit after the break. But I think that one of the things that we need to figure out a way to do is to tell Republicans that they are safe and that we can all be safer if we take care of each other. If we had a national health care plan, for example, we'd all be safer, and put it in that context. Frank, thank you for the call. You raised a really important point, and I'm going to riff on it for a little bit, and then we'll continue with the program. It's 22 minutes past the hour. Every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell the list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you. Okay, so a number of people have basically called and said, how is it that these people standing behind Trump, when you look at the rallies, the people, the Trumpsters on Facebook and Twitter and things like that, how is it that these people just don't get it? That they don't see the corruption in plain sight. In fact, the corruption that Trump brags about. They don't see the exploitation of other people. How do they stay in this bubble, as it were? Well, obviously there's a media piece to this. There's the Fox News bubble and Jen Sako's fabulous documentary, the brainwashing of my dad. Great example. But and then there's the right-wing hate radio bubble, essentially. But you ask the question, what is driving all that? And it turns out that you can turn a liberal into a conservative, or the other way around, with fear. It was just some amazing research that was done. The psychology professor John Barr writes about in a book. The book is called Before You Know It, The Unconscious Reasons Why We Do What We Do. And there have been a number of studies on these, where if people who are liberally inclined, that is, they are inclined to be in favor of social welfare, seeing everybody as part of a family, all that kind of stuff, you can flip them to become conservative if you scare them enough. The conservative worldview being basically hierarchical and patriarchal. We need a strong daddy to care for us. If you scare people enough, that's where they go. So conservatives, by and large, are people who are frightened. This is the principal animating thing, and this is why Fox News, right-wing hate radio, the constant message is be afraid, be afraid. The immigrants are coming to get you. There's a caravan. It's an invasion. It's a germ. It's an infestation. This kind of language that Trump and other conservatives use is designed explicitly to scare people, because frightened people actually become conservative. But they've also done studies where they have people literally just sit quietly for a moment and just imagine that they are physically safe in all dimensions. They're completely safe. And if you can have people imagine that, and then give them a test, check off the list of policy issues, they become more liberal. And this is why Franklin Roosevelt, when he was sworn into office in the depths of the Great Depression in March of 1932, in his inaugural address, he said, the only thing, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, paralyzing fear. I'm paraphrasing here, but I think it's pretty close. And what he was saying is, don't be afraid. And people said, okay, we'll give up the fear. What does Trump say? Be afraid.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
This is the fundamental cleavage. And if you can make people afraid enough, they'll embrace even corruption if they think that it's going to make them safe.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
For the Thom Hartmann Book Club, our book today is How Wealth Rules the World. This is our book today is Playing with Fire, the 1968 election and the transformation of American politics by Lawrence O'Donnell. The first chapter, Seizing the Moment. It starts in 1968. Richard Nixon was in a makeup chair when he met Roger Ailes. Maybe it was the makeup chair that set Ailes off. He was looking at the man who might have been president right now if he had just sat in the makeup chair CBS offered him in Chicago before the first televised presidential debate in American history. Nixon had ignored the network's makeup artist and used a drugstore product called Lazy Shave to cover his heavy 5 o'clock shadow. Nixon once said, "I can shave within 30 seconds before I go on television and still have a beard." The day after the debate, the Chicago Daily News ran the headline, "Was Nixon sabotaged by TV makeup artists?" Richard Daley, the all-powerful Democratic mayor of Chicago, said, "My God, they've embalmed him even before he died." Nixon lost the election to John F. Kennedy by 0.2% of the vote, 49.7% to 49.5%. In an election that close, every mistake matters. A mistake like not getting the makeup right was the kind of thing that infuriated Roger Ailes. Now, 7 years later, Ailes was meeting Nixon for the first time in the makeup room of the Mike Douglas show. At age 26, Ailes looked like an assistant, but he was the boss, the executive producer of the show. And Nixon was once again a presidential candidate in what was beginning to look like a crowded field covering the 1968 Republican nomination. Ailes wanted Nixon to be president, and he knew the most powerful force blocking Nixon's path to the White House was television. To win the White House in the 1960s, you had to understand and respect the power of television. Ailes also knew that one of Nixon's potential rivals for the Republican nomination understood everything about television, Ronald Reagan, the former film and TV actor. Ailes wondered what Nixon had learned about TV since the makeup disaster of the 1960 campaign. Sitting in the makeup chair, Nixon offhandedly mentioned to Ailes how silly it felt to try to reach voters by appearing on an afternoon talk show like this one instead of a news show like Meet the Press. The Mike Douglas show is targeted at housewives and usually populated by B-list showbiz celebrities. In response, Ailes instantly rattled off a list of every bad move Nixon had ever made on TV, and it was a long list. Ailes was a teenager when he'd seen some of these things. This was not the way people talked to former Vice President Richard Milhous Nixon. There was none of the deference Nixon had become accustomed to over the decades, and Nixon loved it. Nixon made Ailes an offer he couldn't refuse. Instead of trying to make Mike Douglas America's biggest afternoon TV star, make Richard Nixon America's next president. With Ailes on the media team, the Nixon campaign was ready to make the move from being the worst TV campaign to the best. "We're going to build this whole campaign around television," Nixon told his media team. "You boys just tell me what to do and I'll do it." Roger Ailes' career in Republican politics, which included every day he ran Fox News, turned out to be longer than Richard Nixon's. Ailes became more influential in Republican politics than Nixon ever was. We have reason to wonder who would be president today if Richard Nixon had not provoked Roger Ailes in the Mike Douglas show makeup room. Such are the seeds that were planted in American politics in the 1968 presidential campaign. Run, Bobby, Run is the subhead for the next part of this. Bobby was a natural on television. In 1967, he was the only potential presidential candidate who could charm a TV audience just by being himself. All he needed was his smile. Bobby was the Elvis of American politics, the only politician who didn't need a last name to identify him. But his last name was everything. It was Bobby Kennedy's last name that made every potential candidate fear him. As the field of candidates began to take shape in 1967, every campaign calculation depended on Bobby, even when he showed no signs of wanting to run, even when he told people he wasn't going to run. President Lyndon Baines Johnson feared Bobby to the point of obsession. Johnson thought Bobby was the only one who could do the unthinkable, challenge the incumbent president's grip on the Democratic nomination. Johnson was sure that Bobby was the only Democrat who might dare run against him. He was wrong. Nixon feared Bobby too, as did every Republican planning a campaign. Nixon knew exactly what to fear. He had lost to a Kennedy before. Losing to a Kennedy meant losing to the Kennedy political machine, and it meant losing it to the Kennedy style. A political machine can be beaten by a better political machine, though Nixon had never seen a better political machine than the Kennedys. Kennedy's style was something else. Nixon knew there was nothing Ailes could do for his image that could compete with Kennedy's style. Nixon couldn't change his sharply receding hairline. At 54, he was too old to do anything but tamp down his short, dark hair as flat as possible on his head. Bobby's hair had grown longer every year of the 1960s. Now at 42, he had the shaggiest hair in the United States Senate. His little brother Ted was the only other senator with a full head of hair. Bobby's hair was beginning to grow over his ears, rock musician length for the Senate then. And everywhere Bobby spoke outside the Senate chamber, he was treated like a rock star. That's what Nixon and Johnson feared most about Bobby, the way the crowds responded to him. They'd never seen anything like it in politics. Nixon and Johnson were both old enough to remember the first time anyone saw fans screaming and swooning for Frank Sinatra in the 1940s, before, during, and after every song Sinatra sang. America saw an even more intense version of that fan reaction when the Beatles landed in the United States in 1964. And now Nixon and Johnson saw a version of it happening to Bobby. Everywhere Bobby went, crowds worked themselves into frenzies. When he spoke, he didn't sound like any senator they'd heard before. His voice wasn't stiff and self-conscious. The book Playing with Fire by Lawrence O'Donnell. In July of 2020, the 7-day Oceania cruise will be going to Bermuda, and I'll be hosting onboard events about the topics of the day. More info at thomhartmann.com or 800-856-1155. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I am going to do a deeper dive into this whole issue of how conservatives think and how liberals think, and why there's a different set of underlying stories for each. And we'll get into that in the next hour. But we've got so much on the table right now, and I'd just like to kind of wrap some of this stuff up. Matthew in Staten Island, New York. Hey, Matthew, what's on your mind today? You wanted to talk about the emoluments clause?
Yeah. Hi, Tom. How are you?
Good.
I live in Staten Island, New York, which is like intensely Trump country, and it's distressing because I'm liberal. And but my question was, the Ukraine stuff, the Russia stuff, all the corruption, all the scandals. But from day one, with that phony paper he put on the table, that's the taxes. But the emoluments clause, from day one, he was literally violating the Constitution. Right. I mean, Jimmy Carter had to sell his peanut farm, and there just seems to be no real mainstream coverage, and that's typical about that. And it's so blatant and flagrant, and I just don't know why that's not discussed more. It's puzzling to me.
Yeah, and just for the record, Carter didn't sell his peanut farm. He put it in a blind trust, and the trust hired a guy to run it. And the guy who ran it screwed it up enough that he nearly lost the farm when he left the presidency. And had to sell off a bunch of property, apparently, in order to recover from it. But he put it in a blind trust. He was not allowed during the 4 years that he was president to even know what was going on with his farm down in Georgia, which is amazing.
And to have all these hotels and property around the world, I mean, it's obviously a conflict of interest. And the sons are running it, and he's not talking to them. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, and on top of that,
I don't understand why the focus isn't more on this.
On the emoluments,
flagrant violation.
And there's two specific places in the Constitution where emoluments are mentioned. One is that no federal officer can take emoluments, can take gifts basically, or income from foreign governments while serving in the United States government. And then the other one is that the president shall not take anything other than a salary while he's in the White House, and no other emoluments. So, and that's in Article 2. I think it's substantial. And then on top of that, and Matthew, thank you for the call, and thanks for bringing this up. On top of that, the lease for the hotel in Washington, D.C., there are conflicting theories about why Trump is now saying that he's willing to sell the Trump Hotel in D.C. He's asking $500 million for it, $500 million. It does about $15 to $20 million a year in business. And I think probably the main reason he is selling it is because that building is the old post office building for Washington, D.C. In fact, it literally is referred to as the old post office building. It looks like a castle. It's just a beautiful, beautiful building. And so it's owned by you and me, by we the people, by the federal government. And the lease explicitly says that if anybody is directly involved in ownership or management of the hotel and is in an elected position, they have to give up the lease. The lease becomes void. I mean, it may well be that what Trump is afraid of is that some kind of a lawsuit is going to happen that's going to cause him to it's just going to go away, right? I mean, somebody will successfully say in a court, please read the lease. The court reads the lease and says, the president can't own this lease, can't be a party to this lease any longer. And so, we're going to give it to Marriott Corporation or Hyatt or something like that. It might be that that's what he's afraid of, or more likely, I think what's really going on is that Donald Trump is out of money. I think he's been out of money for 2 decades. He's had a very, very handy little money laundering operation for oligarchs around the world. He's one of only 2 major developers in New York who are willing to take cash, and cash from blind LLCs, from shell companies essentially. And I think the reasons are fairly obvious. He's just insanely corrupt. Anyhow, Jeff in Greenville, South Carolina. Hey, Jeff, what's on your mind today?
Good morning, Tom. I would just like to touch base on you. I watch your program, and there's so much of it going on. The corruption of Trump, especially from the white evangelical groups, and it's just sickening. It's here right on a local level. I went to church this past week, and it says, "Go right, not left." So I mean, I just can't.
You mean on the little sign out in front of the church?
Yes.
Wow.
That's how bad things are. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to figure that parable out.
Which children would Jesus cage? I mean, is that the new question?
Yeah, pretty much.
Amazing.
And,
amazing.
So I mean, it's just you know, you just can't reason with these people. They're brainwashed, and the only hope we got here is to get these people on the middle of the fence. Otherwise, it's hopeless.
Yeah, and we need to get progressives activated and out. You know, I mean, Michael Moore pointed out that one of the things that really helped flip the Michigan whole political system basically toward Democrats was having legalized marijuana on the ballot. Right, it brought out a lot of young people, and you know, so the Republicans have known this forever, right? They'll put these anti-gay things on the ballot, or they'll put back, you know, before the Supreme Court it was anti-gay marriage stuff, or you know, whatever, you know, the whole bathroom stuff that happened in South Carolina. These things were pure stunts to draw, you know, the bigots into politics, basically. But to see it happening in churches, that's terrible. Jeff, thank you for the call, and thanks for sharing your story with us. Marcy in Gardena, California. Do I have that right, Marcy?
Yes. I wanted to say that I believe that denial makes conservatives feel safe because they don't make the connection that what the U.S. did to Central America by creating drug cartels, destabilizing economies, rigging elections, torturing and killing teachers and union leaders, that caused instability, that kids didn't learn how to read, write, and do arithmetic. They forgot how to farm food. There were cases where it was illegal to catch rainwater. And the presence of the military police and corrupt police, and the consequences of those damages that you have a population that has been destabilized for so long that, you know, they're seeking relief, you know, of the poverty and hardship that was created. And I also wanted to comment, sorry, I'm at work, that John Perkins' movie on Netflix called Confessions of an Economic Hitman shows how they changed labor and environmental laws to benefit corporations, which cause poverty and hardship. And if the conservatives were truly people of faith and, you know, the Christian right, they wouldn't have so little faith in being able to solve these problems. These problems are solvable, and it takes first looking at it and knowing about it to be able to begin to solve it. And I think they just threw up their arms and didn't want to solve it, so they just want to deny it ever existed. Well,
what's happening increasingly is that these countries are having to dance to the tune of foreign billionaires. I mean, I believe it was Bechtel Corporation that bought the water rights and I believe it was Bolivia, it might have been Ecuador, one of those countries. This is back in the 80s. And they bought the water rights, and as you point out, they made it illegal to collect rainwater. You had to buy your water from the corporation. People who had been, you know, collecting rainwater to use for drinking and cooking and food and things like that, and watering their crops for centuries, for millennia, you know, for thousands of years. Exactly. And this giant corporation comes in and says, no, that's illegal. You can't do that anymore. And, you know, ultimately that was, you know, a piece of what I believe flipped the government. I mean, this is history from 30, 40 years ago. That I'm vaguely remembering, but it was pretty horrific.
It would be wonderful if more Americans were aware of the things that these corporations have done and these militaries and these agencies have done to the Latin countries that have caused the poverty and the hardship.
Yes, yeah, I agree. Marcy, thank you for the call. Eric in Milwaukee. Hey, Eric, what's up?
Yeah, hi. How are you doing, Mr. Hartman?
Good. Tom?
Pretty good. I'm just saying for the Republican Party, I believe, aside from and being conservatives, they are big into conserving wealth. But I believe that conservative Christian white supremacy, which is kind of the same thing as Federalists, I believe, know nothings, the Dixiecrats stood for, and that Trump has made it fashionable to do these things, which has really allowed like the deep inherent racism in white folks all around this country to find a home in politics.
Yeah.
Actually, as Martin Luther King had said, though, myself personally, and hopefully many people feel this way, it's actually far more disappointing to see the quote-unquote moderates or liberals that benefit from remaining silent in the face of these policies, essentially joining in on this long-running national conspiracy among the white folks in this country.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome, Eric. Thank you. Well said. And silence is complicity. And that's a problem that we have in part in our media. It's a problem that we have in part in our politics. Although the Democrats do seem to have grown a spine. I mean, they're in the process of impeaching Donald Trump, and there's no doubt in my mind that he will be impeached in the House of Representatives. The question is, what happens in the Senate? I'll do that in the next hour. So we'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
I just got another letter from Donald Trump. I'll share it with you at the top of the next hour. Stick around. And welcome back. Corky in Rochester, New York. Hey, Corky, what's up?
Hello, Tom. Yeah, I'm just getting tired of people not being hardheads and not seeing this guy as corrupt.
Well, if you watch Fox News, he's apparently not corrupt. I mean, they don't report on a lot of the stuff that he's up to, and B, they have people come on all the time and make excuses for him and tell everybody how he's the savior of the country.
Yeah, well, I had Nikki Haley on this morning. I'm telling her about how he's the greatest president and he only cares about the country.
You heard that on Fox News this morning?
No, yeah, I heard that Nikki Haley was on it talking about it.
Oh, yeah. See, Nikki Haley, I think the person who needs to be the most afraid of Nikki Haley is Mike Pence. And I really think that's where they're going. Is trying to, that she's all about trying to replace Pence. Corky, thanks for the call. Michael in Crestline, California. Hey, Michael, what's up? Thanks for watching Free Speech.
Couldn't the House just go through impeachment and then not give it to the Senate?
No. If the House, an impeachment is an indictment, and if somebody is indicted, they have to have a trial unless they resign. And Nixon avoided that by resigning, although he was never indicted because he resigned before even the House voted for the articles of impeachment. But they had drafted them, and they knew knew where they were going, and they knew that it was going to pass the House. And when Nixon learned that he had lost the Senate, that's when he resigned. It was Barry Goldwater and I don't know if Everett Dirksen was involved in that or not, but I think it was Barry Goldwater and a couple of other of his colleagues literally walked over to the White House and sat down with Nixon and said, "Buddy, it's over. Time is over." So why were you trying? I mean, what would the point of that be?
Well, the point would be they'd get all that stuff out there, and then the Senate couldn't say no.
Oh, so you avoid a scenario where Trump is saying, "I'm vindicated."
Yeah. Well, you avoid Mitch McConnell.
Yeah, I don't. I know that the Democrats aren't going to do that, right? Number one, I'm not sure that they can't. I think it's entirely possible that they cannot stop it. I mean, once you've impeached somebody, then there has to be a trial. Otherwise they've been basically tried in the public venue. The whole impeachment process lays out what they did wrong, the crimes that they committed, and the due process. People, even Trump is entitled to due process. He's entitled to defend himself. And that happens in the Senate. That's where his lawyers come in. That's where his defenders come in. That's where his witnesses and whatnot come in and have their say. And although it's going to be real interesting to see tomorrow what Trump and the Republicans try to pull out of their hat to distract us from that 9 o'clock tomorrow morning is going to be a real interesting, Eastern time, is going to be a real interesting moment, because that's when they start asking these very serious questions of people who are, senior diplomats and well-regarded, decorated veterans. They're asking them what happened. And these people are going to be saying, Donald Trump and his administration ordered us to commit bribery and extortion with regard to Ukraine on his behalf. so that he can get himself reelected in 2020. And how's Trump going to try and push that off the news cycle? It's going to be, he's got a big job ahead of him. We'll be right back. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. At ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Boy, what the goings on these days are just extraordinary. Norma in Carbondale, Illinois. Hey, Norma, what's up?
Hey, I'm glad to talk to you.
Thank you.
Excuse me. I'm from Carbondale, Illinois, but I've watched your program for a very long time. I just have something I'd like to kind of throw out to you because I've been thinking something. I'm real frustrated, by the way.
Is this about Ukraine?
Because of a lot of these news programs or whatever channels are presenting, they're promoting Joe Biden. But here I am sitting, here, listening to that, and I'm saying to myself, hey, they're promoting Joe Biden. But I'm 82 years old, and to me, when I look at this picture of him, he is not an ordinary man, and I think they're presenting him as an ordinary man. He was a vice president of the United States, which got his son a job with an oil company in Ukraine, making gobs of money. So
but at the same time, I get it, Norma. I get it. And this is a problem for Joe Biden, and there's no denying that. And we'll see where it goes and what he does with it. But I don't, the principal people who are complaining about Joe Biden's son getting a job, in a foreign country because his dad was vice president. The principal people saying that are the sons and daughter of Donald Trump. It's so ironic that Don Trump Jr. is running around going, this is nepotism, right? Karen in Winter Haven, Florida. Hey, Karen, what's up?
Tom, I think we're going to have to make some changes to the emolument clause in the Constitution so that someone like Donald Trump cannot take office if they have not completely divested of their business interests.
Well, that would require legislation, and that may well happen after Trump is out of office.
Well, I hope so. We all need to have this discussion on getting laws in place so we never get a man like him again.
Yeah. Or in addition to legislation, another way that could be done would be if the Supreme Court ruled that, here's what the emoluments clause means, and here are the conditions under which it can be violated, and here's are the conditions under which it can be satisfied when somebody comes into office who has a lot of wealth. And that's never been adjudicated. And I know that there are several lawsuits right now against Trump for violations of the emoluments clause. There's one by Public Citizen. I believe the ACLU is running one. There's a bunch of them by individuals. And none of them have hit the point where there's a trial yet, and probably won't, before the election. But I agree with you, Karen. This is something that we really need to be figuring out. Karen, thank you for the call. Dave in Minneapolis. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Hey, you mentioned a little earlier that
Mike Pence should be afraid of Nikki Haley.
Yeah, she's coming for his job. Yeah, she wants
well,
to
yeah,
be...
but I know, I know, and I agree with that 100%. But I think that Donald Trump should be afraid of her.
Oh, I agree. I think her
gets,
calculus is real simple. She thinks that he's probably going to survive the impeachment in the Senate, but probably won't survive a second term if he gets reelected. And if she can be his running mate when he runs in 2020, I think she will bring him more votes than Mike Pence does. I think that if I was Donald Trump, that would be a bet that I would make. And I think that she's then thinking, he's so frustrated, he's so burned out, he's being sued by so many people, he's involved in so many different crimes and grifts, and when his taxes finally come out, everybody's going to realize the guy is broke and a con man, and he's going to resign if he's not pushed out. And if he resigns, then I get to be president, Nikki Haley is thinking. I think that's her thing. She thinks she's Jerry Ford.
I think that everything you say is true, except that it's going to go one step further. As soon as she gets sworn in as VP, if she does, God forbid, she's going to 25th Amendment the guy, because nobody in the Republican Party likes him. I mean, they're afraid of him, but they don't like him. And so it would be she's going to go right to the cabinet, and that's who does it, right? The cabinet and the vice president.
Yes, the vice president has to initiate it. Yeah, you're right. I mean, that is like Machiavelli. That is Niccolo Machiavelli on steroids. It makes perfect sense, Dave. It makes perfect sense. And frankly, it wouldn't surprise me at all. Thanks a lot for the call. Azra in Hinsdale, Illinois. Hey, Azra, what's up?
Thank you for taking my call, Tom.
Sure.
I'm a first-time caller.
Thank you.
And I was looking at concerns. We talked about what the Republican Party stands for, but what I find disappointing with our Democratic candidates, whom I love, Bernie and Elizabeth, but they don't talk about the state of our education. It has been a downward trend in learning, in the common man. We, the people, don't seem to know much about what is going on except the latest football scores or the baseball statistics.
Yeah.
And I find that that's why we elected Trump.
I think you're
education.
right. I think you're right, Azra. And my apologies for putting you on with only 45 seconds to talk. I missed I didn't read the clock right. I thought I had an extra minute. But I think your comments are spot on, and I hope you call again. We have another opportunity to talk. Thank you so much. We're going to continue this. We've got some science stuff to talk about after the break too. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Unwanted Spy by Jeffrey Sterling, The Persecution of an American Whistleblower. This is from the prologue. Where am I? How did I get here? Those are the kinds of thoughts you have when your ultimate nightmare comes true. It was January 26th, 2015, my second long day of waiting in a small, windowless, soundless conference room just outside the courtroom number 5 on the 4th floor of the federal courthouse in Alexandria, Virginia. Over the past 2 weeks, I had been on trial, accused of violating the century-old Espionage Act. As an undercover officer for the Central Intelligence Agency, I'd been involved in Operation Merlin, a covert scheme to derail the Iranian effort to build a nuclear bomb by providing their scientists with fake, flawed blueprints for warheads channeled through a Russian scientist. Operation Merlin had ultimately backfired when the Iranian experts detected the fraud, as revealed in the book State of War by reporter James Risen. Agency leaders were furious, not at themselves for launching a risky and ill-conceived scheme, but at the author who dared to expose their incompetence. In their eagerness to punish someone for their embarrassment, they looked around for a scapegoat. They found me. A compliant U.S. attorney dutifully filed an indictment charging me with, quote, unlawful retention and unauthorized disclosure of national defense information, mail fraud, unauthorized conveyance of government property, and obstruction of justice, end quote. 9 criminal charges in all, based on the claim that I'd supposedly leaked classified information about Operation Merlin to James Risen. The truth is that I did not leak any classified information related to CIA operations to James Risen or to anyone else. But I am a whistleblower. I'd blown the whistle by suing the CIA for discriminating against me when I was an employee there. I'd also attempted to blow the whistle about the dangers of Operation Merlin, not by leaking, but by submitting my warnings to staff members of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Sadly, those warnings were ignored. I'd been forced to accept some disheartening truths, that neither blatant discrimination nor a dangerous operation related to weapons of mass destruction were matters of real concern to the powers that be at the agency or among the members of Congress charged with oversight of intelligence matters. Even before the trial had begun, I'd known that my prospects weren't good. The world had witnessed the cases of Edward Snowden, Chelsea Manning, John Kiriakou, and a series of other whistleblowers whose prosecution, some said persecution, had been pursued by President Barack Obama with an eagerness that almost suggested a personal vendetta. In the atmosphere created by these cases, the mere accusation of having leaked classified information was enough to automatically condemn someone. In refusing to plead guilty and instead insisting on my right to go to trial, I knew I was facing an uphill battle, but I could not and would not confess to something I did not do. During the trial, the government did not present a shred of hard evidence to validate the charges against me. Even Judge Leonie Brinkman summarized the case against me as being based on, quote, very powerful circumstantial evidence, end quote, rather than on hard proof. But there was one incriminating fact about which there could be no doubt. The CIA had paraded a whole host of current and former agents in front of the jury, and I didn't look like any of them. I was a black man who dared to build a career serving my country as an officer of the CIA. The trial had lasted a week and a half. Now I was enduring the most excruciating part of the whole ordeal, waiting for a verdict. How the hell did it all come to this? I'd grown up as a true believer in the American dream. Work hard, do your duty, stand up for yourself. Those are the rules of the game, or so I'd been taught. I knew I'd done nothing wrong, and I knew that fighting against wrongs is what an American hero is supposed to do. That's all I knew how to do. That's why I was now clinging to hope and continuing to fight, unable to comprehend how defending my rights could somehow get me branded a traitor. Thankfully, I wasn't alone in that waiting room. My wife, Holly, and my attorneys, Ed McMahon and Barry J. Pollock, were there beside me. But having company isn't very comforting when you have no words to say to one another. Silence can be uncomfortable, and when it's forced, it can be absolutely nerve-wracking. All of them, especially Holly, had believed in me and fought for me, and I could tell that awaiting the jury's decision was almost as excruciating for them as it was for me. But for me, there was a sharper twist to this agonizing time of uncertainty. More than waiting to learn my fate, I was waiting to learn what my country thought of me. This was a question I'd wrestled with my entire life. The experience was often stressful, even painful. My entire life had been one of fighting against stereotypes, assumptions, and limitations placed on me because of the color of my skin, something that happened to me repeatedly in both white America and black America. The American dream I believed in and strove for wasn't a white American dream or a black American dream. It was simply my American dream. But to many of those around me, it must not have been the right American dream, because I kept getting into trouble through no intention of my own. That, in a nutshell, is the story of the events that brought me to this room. My years of struggling to find a place in American society where I could be accepted for who I am. My battle to be recognized as a worthy member of the CIA. My shadowy conflict with people within the agency who for some reason were unwilling to accept me as part of their team. Unwanted Spy by Jeffrey Sterling. You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, you know, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, you know, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com and you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So what is a chemical and why should we be concerned about them? Dr. David Andrews is with us. He's a senior scientist with the Environmental Working Group. EWG.org is their website. His Twitter handle, DQASCI. Dr. Andrews, welcome to the program. Pardon me.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be speaking with you today.
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic. We're talking about these toxic fluorinated chemicals. PFAS is one of them. There's a few others. They all seem to have an F in there for fluorine. What are these chemicals? Where did they come from, and why do you call them forever chemicals?
So they're more commonly referred to as the Teflon and Scotchgard chemicals, associating them with the consumer products that people are very much aware. But as you said, this is a large family of chemicals. They all have fluorine in them, and they're called forever chemicals because once released into the environment, they do not break apart. And so that's part of the reason they found widespread use, but that's also what's led to enormous contamination of our water across the country. And these chemicals actually can be detected in nearly every single person's blood in the entire country.
Wow. And now, and these are the chemicals that initially it was like, they're like flame retardants and things. Initially it was like, these things don't break down, so we can put them on the carpet or on the furniture, and because they don't break down, you'll have, resistance to fire for 30, 40, 50 years, the lifetime of the couch, 10 years, whatever.
That's right. No stains, the water repellent, the water will roll right off, your wine, really that grease resistance also is what helped them find widespread use, including in all of our textiles, most outerwear jackets. These chemicals are incredibly common. They're actually put into food wrappers also, so that the grease wouldn't soak through the wrapper.
Are these the chemicals that are also in the inside of paper cups so that they don't leak?
That's actually a little bit different. Those are really plastic coatings. These same chemicals are not found in the paper cups, at least in our recent testing.
Okay. So why should we worry about these chemicals lasting forever and showing up in the blood of all of us?
So it turns out that at incredibly low concentrations in water, parts per trillion, these chemicals are actually impacting health. And we're seeing in studies just done in the last few years that these chemicals in your blood reduce the effectiveness of vaccines. They can actually raise your cholesterol level. And then at higher doses, they're associated with a whole host of other really horrible health effects, a number of different types of cancer, as well as pregnancy, birth outcomes. These chemicals really kind of hit every single one of our body functions and not in a good way.
Whoa. So A, is there an effort to regulate these chemicals? And B, how do we avoid them given that they're present right now?
There are some ongoing efforts to regulate them. I will say that the process has become so convoluted at EPA, especially in terms of setting new regulations for drinking water contaminants. Not a single new one has been set in over 2 decades. that I wouldn't hold your breath for the EPA to take leadership. But many states are setting regulations, and we've actually really put a lot of effort into making tap water contaminant information available for the whole country. So that's on our website, ewg.org. You can type in your zip code. It'll report which contaminants were detected, if PFAS contaminants were detected. And then it provides ways that you can actually filter these contaminants out of your water.
How do you filter them out? Is it just your basic Brita filter kind of, commercial products?
So the Brita filter works reasonably well, but not as consistently as sometimes you'd want, especially for these contaminants. Mm-hmm. There's a reverse osmosis filter, which is a bit more expensive, installs under the sink, will definitely remove all those contaminants, and easy to check that it's working.
Interesting. And you said that this is in wrappers for foods and things. I mean, if you're shopping, what are the things that you want to avoid in order to avoid these chemicals?
Right. So a recent study actually found that people who ate food at home, prepared their own meals, actually had lower levels of these chemicals, just because they are more common in takeout food, wrappers, and the bags from takeout food. So that's one easy step there is really just minimizing, cooking at home. Right. And the one food that I'd recommend, steering away from as much as possible is the microwave popcorn, just because those bags were really coated in it. And studies going back over a decade now show that people who consume microwave popcorn have much higher levels in their blood.
Wow. So if I order, from one of these delivery services, if I order, food from a Thai restaurant or an Italian or whatever it may be, are you saying that the carry-out packaging is coated with these Teflon, like these PFAS chemicals?
Quite often, but really there's no way to know. And that's why we're really calling on states and the government these are unnecessary chemicals. They don't need to be there. There are replacements, and so they're not in every single wrapper. They're not in every carry-out container. But they're in a lot of them, and they're pervasive across the food system. And so simple regulatory steps could just get these off the market and end that exposure route.
If these chemicals live forever and they have these negative health consequences ranging all the way up to cancer for humans, what are the consequences of these chemicals to other living things in our biosphere? I mean, we know that some of the chemicals that interrupt hormones, for example, the early flag that we saw was changes in fish and frogs and things. Are we seeing the consequence of these fluorinated chemicals in the environment as a whole?
There are a number of studies, and actually you can detect these chemicals in animal species across the globe, polar bears, whales, really any type of species. Humans do seem to be the most susceptible to harm from these. It's not to say that other species in the environment are escaping harm, but humans definitely seem to be the most sensitive to impacts on the hormone system, reproduction, and, as I mentioned, these immune system, cholesterol impacts.
Yeah. Remarkable stuff. Just absolutely fascinating. Dr. David Andrews, he's with the senior scientist with the Environmental Working Group, ewg.org. You can read the report over there. Fascinating stuff. Dr. Andrews, thank you so much for dropping by.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Dr. David Andrews. We'll be back. I want to get into, on the backside of this break, when we come back, I want to get into how it is that Trump and his buddies are using a basic core thing about conservatism.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And they're using that basically in kind of a giant mind control experiment. I'll lay it all out in about 4 minutes. Stick around. And welcome back. Let's see here, Zoe in Louisville, Kentucky. Or is it Zoe?
Sure. It's Zoe.
Hey, Zoe.
That's fine though. If you don't, the E is silent.
Okay.
Anyway, wow, I don't know how I'm going to be able to follow up that amazing scientist fellow, but I'll take a shot at it. Okay. I've been listening to and thinking about this whole conversation throughout the first couple of hours about what is the Republican Party about. And honestly, I think they're just trying to find the dumbest figurehead that they can to stick at the top of the pyramid. In this case, it's the orange boy right now, and before it was Cheney got away with tons of stuff when W was at the top.
Right.
But it's all to feed this fill-in-the-blank industrial complex.
Yeah.
Whether that's military, prison, debt. But it does go back to, you used to say that progressives believe that everyone is basically good, and conservatives believe that everyone is basically evil.
Yeah.
And that leads me to what I mentioned when I first called in, which is this George Lucas movie that he made before Star Wars and even before American Graffiti. And it was called THX 1138. He made it as a student film, and Francis Ford Coppola saw it at a student exhibit and said, we got to make it a full-length film. And the film's almost 50 years old now, but it's very intelligent. And Lucas used to say in interviews and things that the idea for this film came when he thought about what would happen if we took capitalism to its furthest point. And everything is taken away from people, every sort of autonomy of, involving anything, production, reproduction, worship, emotion. Even in this alternate future, you could get arrested for criminal drug evasion. But it has to do with this taking everything away from everybody, every choice, not because they don't want to have a government make the choices for them, but because they want to be the ones to make the choice for them.
So it's
and
like
to drive the wages down low enough. Yeah, go ahead.
It's like the triumph of libertarianism? I mean, is that what you're saying?
Well, yes, sort of, yes. Although, as your former coworker Mark Maron used to say, he thinks that the right wing is going to try to drive the wages low enough and the war without end enough so that people will be so poor and there will be so many, the military-industrial complex will be so huge that eventually all they'll have to do to recruit for the military is come on the television screen and say, hey, are you hungry? Do you need a place to sleep?
Well, that's essentially what they're doing right now. You've got a measurable fraction of the U.S. Armed Forces are people who are there to flee poverty.
Yeah, exactly.
And this is, Jefferson said, I hope I shall never live to see the day when young American men are willing to be paid to be shot at for a sixpence, was his phrase. And here we are.
Exactly.
I mean, the military has become the job of last resort. And it shouldn't be. It should be a calling. It should,
Right. Absolutely. You should want to serve your country. You should not be forced to serve your country by some other terrible, awful circumstance.
Yeah,
they're giving lip service to the, they're giving lip service to the evangelicals and freeing them to do whatever they want as far as our reproductive justice is concerned, and that's going to give them the population boost they need to.
Yeah.
That sounds so conspiracy theory. I'm sorry.
I got it. No, I got it. Thank you, Zoe. I appreciate the call, and thanks for watching us there in Louisville. We'll be back at 17 minutes, coming up on 18 minutes past the hour. Every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you. So our science fact for the day, new research was published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine that found that running, I mean, literally any amount of running, even, running for 10, 15 minutes one day a week, that running is associated with a significantly reduced chance of dying from any cause. It lowers the risk of cancer, it lowers the risk of heart attacks, everything. So yeah, you heard me, even small amounts of running decrease the risk of death by up to 30%. So get out your sneakers, folks. Okay, I also wanted to talk about, and this, I guess, kind of turns on science as well, is what is the Republican Party up to? What are they selling? What are they promoting? And it turns out that it's usually fear. This is some just fascinating research that has been principally done by a psychology professor at Yale University. His name is John Bargh, B-A-R-G-H. He wrote a book, Before You Know It, The Unconscious Reasons We Do What We Do. And what they found after 9/11 was that there was a measurable shift in public sentiment from liberal policy positions. I'm talking things like Social Security and Medicare, from liberal policy positions to conservative policy positions. Oh, we should just privatize it. That's fine. George Bush is going to talk about that. Great. And in fact, that was 2001, right? In 2003, a group of scientists did a kind of a summary study of other studies on the impact of fear on people's political perspectives. And what they found was that when people are frightened, they become conservative. They start adopting conservative policy positions. And in fact, this is a quote from that study. They said, and I quote, "People embrace political conservatism because it serves to reduce fear, anxiety, and uncertainty, to avoid change, disruption, and ambiguity, and to explain, order, and justify inequality among groups and individuals." So now this is where it gets absolutely fascinating, this whole thing. I mean, seriously fascinating. Because making people afraid does make them conservative, but what if you make them not afraid? What if you do it the other way? Does that make them more liberal? The researchers, this is from an article about this by Hillary Brooke in BusinessInsider.com. The researchers behind the psychology experiment told a group of participants to imagine that they'd been granted a superpower by a magic genie, and suddenly they were as invincible as Superman. Bullets would literally bounce off them. Fire couldn't scorch their skin, and a fall from a cliff would not hurt at all. And then the control group was told to simply imagine that they could fly. The people who actually, I mean, this is fascinating. Among the people who actually just imagined this, just spend 5 minutes imagining that you are Superman, you are invincible. Liberal participants' attitudes on social issues did not shift at all. The conservative participants, on the other hand, started adopting more liberal views on social issues, although not on economic ones. Participants who imagined that they had the ability to fly had no change in their political views. There was another study that Bargh did. He found that just simply having people wash their hands with soap and water makes them less hostile to people who are different from them, because they feel like they've controlled their environment, that they're in less danger. So, very simple equation here. When people feel safe, they become progressive. When people feel unsafe, fearful, frightened, they become conservative. So the lesson out of this is that if progressives want people to think progressive and vote progressive, we need to be making people feel safe. Or at the very least, talking about how our policies would make people feel safe. And really, that's what progressive policies do. I mean, you think about, what's a national health care system? It's safety for everybody. And you get, some conservative who says, oh, national health care system, oh, you want to tax me, right? They're being afraid of losing their money. And, You say, well, do you want the person walking down the street next to you who's coughing and has tuberculosis not to be able to get treated? Or the guy who's handling your food in the back room in the restaurant who has tuberculosis, and a quarter of the world's human population has tuberculosis. Do you want one of those people handling your food? Or would you rather that they had access to health care so that they could get their TB treated? Now, I suppose that's using fear also, but it puts it in that frame. Or the way to say it would be, if we all had access to health care, if we had a national health care system, we would not have these problems. So, A, making people more progressive, or making people feel safe, makes them progressive. But B, making people feel afraid makes them more conservative and more vulnerable to a conservative message. Which brings me to the email that I got about an hour ago from Donald Trump. And I'll just read it to you. And just think in your mind about how if you tell somebody that somebody else is going to harm them or erase them or replace them, it makes them frightened, which makes them conservative. Now, just listen to this. Fred, this is madness. Nancy and her Democratic minions know that I've done nothing wrong, but they are still trying to take us down. Just last week, 231 Democrats voted to continue this hoax and formalize the impeachment probe. This impeachment nonsense is just a continuation of the witch hunt hoax, which has been going on since before I even got elected. They hate me, but most of all, they hate you, Fred. And the you is in all caps. They hate the idea of you, all caps, being in charge of our country. They want to erase, all caps, your vote like it never existed. They want to erase your voice, and they want to erase your future. But I know they will fail because in America, the people rule again. It's going to take a tremendous amount of resources to continue fighting back against their lies and deception. And that's why I'm calling on our top defenders like you, Fred, to step up and activate your impeachment defense mechanism membership and get your personalized membership card. Please contribute $35 right now to receive your official impeachment defense membership card and mark your status as one of our charter members. A little fear on the menu? I mean, I started this show today. The first hour was basically, what is the Republican Party? What do they have to sell? What is it that they're selling? Why would somebody become a Republican? Well, I think we just got it. Republicans are people, at least Republican voters. The Republican overlords are simply billionaires. But the Republican voters, they're people who are afraid. And we need to say to them, don't be afraid. It's all going to be fine.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We can live together as a community. We can. Our book in today's Thom Hartmann Book Club is by Harvey J. Kaye, Professor Harvey Kaye. Take Hold of Our History, Make America Radical Again. This is from the introduction. On December 1st, 1862, in the midst of the Civil War, just weeks before he was to issue the Emancipation Proclamation, President Abraham Lincoln delivered his annual message to Congress. Lincoln firmly believed that the United States had an historic responsibility to demonstrate to the world that people can govern themselves, make equal rights not just a self-evident truth, but a manifest one, and create a political and economic order in which working people, both white and black, are not compelled to bow to anyone, neither aristocrats nor capitalists. Empowered by tens of thousands of black slaves who were already liberating themselves from bondage by escaping to the Union lines, and increasingly confident that the majority of his fellow Americans would recognize the truth of what he was saying, Lincoln closed his address by calling on them to see that the time had come to remember who they were and what they demanded, or what that demanded. He told them that to save the nation and all that it represented, they must live up to the nation's declared revolutionary purpose and promise, an act to radically enhance American freedom by bringing an end to slavery. This is a quote from Lincoln's address. Fellow citizens, we cannot escape history. The fiery trial through which we pass will light us down in honor or dishonor to the latest generation. We say we are for the Union. The world will not forget that we say this. We know how to save the Union. The world knows we do know how to save it. We, even we here, hold the power and bear the responsibility. In giving freedom to the slave, we assure freedom to the free, honorable alike in what we give and what we preserve. We shall nobly save or meanly lose the last best hope of earth. We too, end of quote from Lincoln. Back to Harvey. We too cannot escape history. Our own struggle to save the nation and the promise it proclaims has begun. Finally, after more than 40 years of fear-driven class war and culture war campaigns against the democratic achievements of generations, the hard-won rights of workers, women and people of color, and the very memory of how they were secured, and now both in the wake of the election debacle of 2016, which gave the presidency to the corrupt, mendacious, racist, sexist, and treacherous demagogue Donald Trump, and continued control of Congress to the formerly conservative but increasingly reactionary Republican Party, and in the face of intensified class and culture war campaigns, we the people have come not only to recognize that American democratic life is in jeopardy, but also to mobilize in hopes of saving it. Millions of us have rallied to the resistance and expressed our democratic fears and desires in action. In the historic Women's March and March for Our Lives of young people, the protests, demonstrations, and legal actions to defend the lives and rights of immigrants and refugees, the Me Too movement to combat sexual assault and harassment, the massive teachers' strikes for higher pay and better funding of public schools in states red and blue, and the enthusiastic canvassing and campaigning for a blue wave to win back Congress in the 2018 midterm elections. But resistance is not enough. The time has come for us to remember who we are and what that demands. The time has come for us to embrace our radical history, the history of how a generation of Americans, high and low, and in all their diversity, not only turned their colonial rebellion into a war for independence, but also imbued American life, whether they all intended it or not, with radical imperative and impulse by declaring a revolutionary promise of freedom, equality, and democracy for all. The history of how generations of radicals and reformers served as the prophetic memory of that promise, and how generations of ordinary men and women, native-born and immigrant, struggled to make real the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and to expand not only the we in We the People, but also the powers of the people. And most especially in view of the crises we ourselves face, the history of how our greatest generations confronted and prevailed over the forces that threatened to destroy the nation and bury its revolutionary promise in the 1770s, 1860s, and 1930s and 1940s, not to mention the 1960s, by acting to make the United States, both inspired by Washington, Lincoln, and FDR, and pushing them to go farther than they might otherwise have gone, radically freer, more equal, and more democratic than ever before. The time has come to take hold of that history and make America radical again. I've titled this collection of my speeches and essays, Take Hold of Our History, Make America Radical Again, for reasons that will become obvious, and yet I cannot help but confess that if I had had to title it otherwise, I would have been sorely tempted to use, with full attribution, the title Max Lerner gave to his 1938 work, It Is Later Than You Think, The Need for a Militant Democracy. While it may not seem so, the crisis we face is no less demanding of action, urgent action, than that which confronted his generation. The book Take Hold of Our History by Harvey J. Kaye. Is tweeting Major breaking news, Roger Stone's trial. I mentioned this in the first hour, by the way, but I see lots of other people are jumping on it now. Roger Stone's trial has revealed a new impeachable offense and federal felony committed by Donald Trump, perjury, for lying under oath during the Mueller investigation about his access to Kremlin cutout / hostile non-state intelligence service WikiLeaks. Bottom line, Donald Trump, knew what was coming out of WikiLeaks. He testified before a grand jury, before Mueller's grand jury, in writing, that he didn't know. And according to Rick Gates, who was there when Trump learned this from Roger Stone, Trump was lying through his teeth. Another impeachable offense. I realize you're shocked, right? Donald Trump has committed another impeachable. Really? Oh, man. Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
Well, let's go on to talking about conservatism and fear.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you say conservative, not you, but when that, I have to check and see, okay, what is meant by this term?
Right.
Is this classical conservatism? So I'm going to define that as divine right monarchy. You are the king by by the right of God, or is it conservatism somewhere on the continuum of classical liberalism? I mean, there are conservatives within liberalism. So I have to say, well, which are we talking about? And I started to think, well, when you talk about fear, in terms of a king, well, the people mostly supported the king. When there was a king, most people supported the king because you damn well better, because you can be you would be fearful of some other warlord coming and killing you and your family and taking your land.
Right.
So it seems to me that and I've heard this even with Trump supporters. A woman, I think, was from Michigan. I think Saginaw, Michigan, said, I thought I'd hear myself say this, but I never thought I'd want a dictator, but yeah, Donald Trump would be okay.
Mm.
So what they want is a protectorate.
Right. They want a strong daddy to take care of them.
Right.
Yeah.
They want a protectorate and to quell the things that are fearful to them. Whereas you see that, and then the question of what's big government is, well, you could say that both liberalism and conservatism has big government. It's just that who has a hand in it. And what conservatives do not like is the fact that the people, because ultimately that's what liberalism is self-government. Right. And conservatives don't like the fact that the people themselves have a hand in their governance and what will become. So in terms of policy, they want the king to make all the policy. And what they're hoping is if the king is of their ilk, and that's pretty much what it was in the day of kings, is they will protect you from people that don't look like you, don't eat the same kind of food as you do, and don't have the same language dialect that you do. And that's exactly what he's doing. I mean, he's coming across exactly like a would-be king.
Yeah, but and what's fascinating about it is these studies that were done by this John Barr guy, or Barge. What he was actually looking at was the way that he was measuring how people's perspectives or positions on the conservative to liberal spectrum changed was actual policy stuff. Do you support expanding Social Security? Do you support everybody having access to low cost or free health care? Do you support everybody having access to pre-K education, to college, debt-free college, stuff like that? I mean, they were just using parts of the ongoing debate, the dialogue about what direction our country should be going, and
right.
seeing
and you can
shifts in those things based on whether people felt afraid or not.
Right, and you can see it, and what I was talking about is that goes down to who has a hand in government.
Right.
So what they really want is, and this is what they keep pushing, is they want a single person, a monarch, to have more a hand of government than anybody else. And that way, that one person will make the decisions that they trust to be the ones that are protecting them. And it's really funny is that we talk about their fear from what? And they have to have guns, and they're locking the doors of their churches, and yet who are they afraid of? They can't be afraid of some gun-grabbing liberal who doesn't want a gun.
Right.
So they're afraid of themselves. they're afraid of the people that are just like them.
Yes. They have that nameless, unreasoning, paralyzing fear that FDR talked about in 1933. Spot on, Paul. Thank you very much. Bob in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hey, Bob, what's up?
Hey, Tom. How you doing?
Good.
I was calling in regards to was it Dr. Thomas from the EWG you had on earlier?
Yeah, Dr. David. I'm sorry, I don't have his name right in front of me right now, but David.
Well, the good doctor.
Andrews.
Go
Dr.
ahead.
David Andrews. Yes.
Andrews. My apologies for the good doctor. No, I was just going to bring home the point that North Carolina, I think we're the third most contaminated state for, I'll spell it correctly, the PFAS, the
Right.
PFAS chemicals.
Yes.
And I guess another of the derivatives of the PFOA, and I think it's something in the order of like 1.5 million people. The city of Wilmington, this was first discovered, I think, back in the, I guess the term was Gen X. It was basically a derivative of this PFOA, and this was started back in 1980
Yeah.
with a Chemours plant, DuPont in Fayetteville, dumping into the Cape Fear River. So this is just one place where we have that, where the state has been wrestling with this, where it's been brought up, just since 2012 as an issue.
So it's not because they make furniture there. It's because they actually make the chemical there.
You got it, exactly that. And I think your good friend Mr. Mike Papantonio might be able to talk about this in much more detail. But it's been it's a huge problem for Wilmington. I have some of my wife's families in Wilmington, and I tell them you really shouldn't be drinking the water because unfortunately of this contamination. And
right, or get a reverse osmosis filter.
Yeah, that's yes. So it was good to hear that there were some ways to remedy this. So thank you for putting him on the air, and also how pervasive and incredibly persistent those chemicals are.
Yeah, this is very troubling. Bob, thank you for the call. I know Mike Papantonio has been involved in a lawsuit about this. In fact, he's talked about it on this program. John in Cambria, California. Hey, John, what's on your mind?
Yeah, Cambria. Not much. Thank you for taking my call. You asked earlier in your show, what's Donald Trump going to do when the impeachment hearings start? How is he going to take the air out of the news
tomorrow
cycle?
Morning, yeah.
Tomorrow morning. Yeah. I believe he is probably going to bomb Iran.
Seriously?
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't put it past him. He said that's what Obama would do to get reelected.
Yeah.
And he now has a reason.
He doesn't want anyone to hear what's going to come out during these impeachment hearings.
Yeah.
And he's going to go full strike on Iran.
John, I really, really, really hope you're wrong, and I
hope I'm wrong too.
Yeah, but I can't argue that you're definitely wrong. John, thank you for the call. Dave in Charleston, South Carolina. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Tom, thanks for taking my call, man.
Sure.
Just real quick, I had a conversation with a friend of mine this weekend. He is a former elected official, just a county guy in Pennsylvania, and he said that our form of government, democracy, is not the best form of government anymore. Actually, a good king would be the best form of government.
Well, that's that conservative, frightened worldview.
But he said that there's no way that 435 people can agree on anything in Congress.
Well, they don't all have to agree. We don't have a consensus-based system. We have a majority wins-based system. So you only have to you only have to convince half plus one.
It just blew me away that he said that. This guy works quite a bit with the Republican Party in Pennsylvania.
Right.
And I just was blown away by that. And I heard your previous caller talking about that, and I don't know if that's where they're going now.
I think it may be. I think, in fact, they've been there for quite some time. There's the old saying, the old cliche that Democrats fall in love and Republicans fall in line. Republicans are looking for a leader. Democrats are looking for a conversation, or for consensus. And I suspect that there's a whole lot more Republicans out there who think the way that you're talking, Dave, and the people, particularly the MAGA hat people, who show up at the Trump rallies, they would probably be very, very, very comfortable with Donald Trump declaring a state of emergency and making himself king.
Guy. I mean, he's not a MAGA hat guy. I mean, he's a smart guy.
Right.
He's not one of these dummies. I mean, he's a pretty smart dude.
You look at the American political system right now, and it's obvious it's broken. Since the mid-1980s, what the majority of the people want has not been what government does. And the reason why is because in the mid-70s, the Supreme Court blew up all this legislation, this good government legislation that regulated money in politics, and said, if billionaires want to own politicians, that's fine. That's called free speech. This was a brand new radical doctrine. It's not embraced by most other countries. It was embraced only by 5 conservatives on the court in 2 decisions in the 70s, and then more recently, double ratified and expanded with Citizens United and McCutcheon. And it has led to the corruption of American politics to the point where the Gillens and Page study out of Northwestern and Princeton, from 2014, found that literally the political desires of the bottom 90% are less likely than random chance to be enacted. In other words, they're actually, we're actually not getting what we want. It's not just that we're not getting what we want. We're not getting what we want in part because we want it. And then on the other hand, the political desires, the political outcomes that are desired by the top 10% of the population economically are significantly higher probability of being turned into actual legislation than random chance. So, that's the definition of an oligarchy. And if you're looking at an oligarchy and you believe that there's no way to fix money in politics, in other words, the Supreme Court has just, this is how they betrayed this country, one of the ways that they betrayed this country, but this is a big one. Then what do you do? Well, a benign king might make a certain amount of sense. I think we need to get money out of politics personally, but I understand.
Yeah, but you talk about how they have the majority is not ruling, and they are ruling from the minority, and that's how they could do it.
Oh yeah, and it's been that way since the 1980s. It's in my opinion, it's 70% of it is because of these Supreme Court decisions in 76 and 78, Buckley and First National Bank.
No doubt.
Dave, thanks a lot for the call. I mean, I as I said, I suspect that Dave's acquaintance is not the outlier among people who are on the right, as it were. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Isn't it fascinating, though, that you can actually turn a conservative into a progressive by making them feel safe? We got to work on that. And welcome back. Heather in Port Angeles, Washington, watching us on YouTube. Hey, Heather, what's up?
How are you doing there, Tom?
I am well, Heather. I hope you are too. What's on your mind today?
You asked a question about what direction the Republican Party was going to be going into. For a long time, I considered myself to be a libertarian, and that was until I realized that there was a huge influx of racism, xenophobia, and protectionist feelings in the Libertarian Party, and I see that as I look at the Republican Party now, I see that there's really no difference between the two of them.
Yeah, the Republican Party has been heavily infected by libertarianism, and libertarianism was created in the 1960s by a real estate lobbying group called the FEE, F-E-E, and I forget what the acronym stands for, but it's a trade association, and they wanted to have a politically plausible sounding rationalization for basically greed, for an economic policy that favors rich people. And, so they hatched this thing called libertarianism. And Mark Ames he wrote a book about this. He's written numerous articles about it. If you just Google or DuckDuckGo, Mark Ames, A-M-E-S, and libertarian, it'll pop right up. Or my name and libertarian, you'll find lots of references and links to it. In my 20s, there was a year, I think it was the year that I was 26 or 27, I thought libertarianism was really cool. whatever year that was. Harry Brown, as I recall, was running for president on the Libertarian ticket. I think that was his name.
Yes.
And I had I had his bumper sticker that said, freedom works. That was his slogan. And, it seemed to make sense. The marketplace makes all these decisions. We should let the marketplace rule. But then, I was the kind of the target for libertarians at the time. I owned my own business, and my own business was making a lot of money. And so it's like people with a lot of money tend to go, oh, yeah, libertarian. But, I realized how crazy it was and essentially renounced it. For some of us, it takes longer than others. Yeah. Heather, thank you very much for the call. I appreciate it. Dave in Inverness, Florida. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Yeah, I was a libertarian, too. But for economic reasons, as far as getting us off the silver standards in '71, and William Simon wrote a book about it, by the way, Tom. It was called A Time for Truth. But anyway, that's not why I called you. I'm trying to get back to this, your initial topic, which was, I got on C-SPAN the other day because they had a doctor from the FDA on, and he was not condemning, but saying how dangerous CDBs are, this cannabis, this product that you put on your skin or whatever.
Right.
But when I got on there, and the first thing I said, so you're condemning this because you haven't studied it, and there's no proof of it. I says, but what about the glyphosate? There was a dead silence. I says, what about the glyphosate that they're spraying on our food at harvest time?
Right.
He says, I know the concerns are because it's non-Hodgkin's lymphoma scare and everything. I said, yeah, but have you tested glyphosate on our food? He says, no. And he put his head down when he did this time. He goes, and by the way, this FDA guy, you know where he came from.
Right.
Just like the head of the FDA is an old lobbyist. But my point is, he put his head down and he said, we don't actually test chemicals. Just EPA. That's the job of the EPA.
Amazing.
That's how he ducked it.
Yeah, amazing. Dave, thanks. Thanks for sharing that story. We'll be back. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Cheryl in Pulaski, Illinois. Hey, Cheryl, what's on your mind today?
Well, you were talking about love and hate. Now, I was at breakfast Sunday, and they talked about Medicare and Part N that has you pay a higher premium for it as a supplement program with your Medicare. Mm-hmm. It's being ended this year.
Right, and
I was
F
told
also.
by.
Yeah.
Why?
I'm not really sure. There's a couple of, these are the Medigap plans. So if you have Medicare, there's this 20% hole in Part B, and you can fill that in with one of these Medigap plans that you buy from a private insurance company. And I believe it's the F and N. I don't have it in front of me here right now, but there were two plans that had absolutely no deductible. And they were like $175 a year more than one that had basically a $175 deductible. And so they've done away with the no deductible plans, the higher, the one that has a deductible that's close to those, I think it's E, but I again, don't take my word for it, look it up. is available. If you have the old plans, though, they've been grandfathered in. You can hang on to them. So that's what's going on. Why it happened, Cheryl, I just don't know. I have no idea. Courtney in Detroit. Hey, Courtney, what's on your mind today? Thanks for listening to Sirius XM.
Hey, guy, how you doing today?
Good. What's up?
Hey, I was just thinking about something here with all this politics and all these rich folks and all that kind of stuff like that, threatening the freedom of the average person in America.
Mm-hmm.
I was just basically thinking, what if he was to threaten to do not go to work? Anybody make less than $100,000 except for doctors and people of health care and all that kind of stuff like that. Just threaten.
Yeah, what you're describing, Courtney, is called a general strike, and these things happen frequently in countries that are heavily unionized. France, for example, experienced one just last year, or this year rather. But typically, for general strikes to work, you have to have a population that's at least 30 or 40% unionized, and we're at 6% right now since Reagan, went to war against American workers. But your point is well taken, and I would hope that we can reach the point where we actually can do that. Courtney, thank you for the call. Dana in Ada, Ohio. Hey, Dana, what's up?
Well, Tom, I've been wondering for a long time, how do these politicians and the rest of these yahoos that call themselves top of the line, how is it they get away with these crimes and robbing us blind, and then they just resign and it's all gone? Everything's fine.
Well, we set a terrible precedent with the Richard Nixon resignation and impeachment. When Jerry Ford pardoned Richard Nixon for all crimes, past, present, whatever, that was a mistake in my opinion. And Nixon should have been subject to due process. He should have been prosecuted for some of the things he did, particularly for taking bribes. I mean, when it's clearly documented that he took cash bribes, $500,000 from the milk lobby and $1 million from Jimmy Hoffa, and and there's basically no disputing these things, and I think that the failure to hold him accountable is a problem. Dana, thank you for the call. And then Clinton gave Reagan and Bush a pass on Iran-Contra, and it's continued ever since. Democrats come into office, they forgive the Republicans who committed crimes before them. Chuck in Indianapolis. Hey, Chuck, what's on your mind? We have a minute left on the show.
Tom, it took me a long time as a Republican,
Chuck, you get your mouth closer to the microphone. I can hardly hear you.
I'm sorry, Tom. It took me a long time as a lifelong Republican to come to the conclusion Trump has to go. I didn't vote for him, but it's time for him to go. The House will impeach, the Senate will acquit. That's what I really believe.
And if the Senate acquits, does he acquire superpowers in your mind? Is he now I'm vindicated?
He'll be reelected. That's what I really believe is going to end up out of this equation. He'll be reelected.
I think it's a possibility. I think it's a very real possibility. I hope it's not the case. Chuck, thank you for the call, and thank you for being a civil Republican and calling in. I hope to talk to you again soon. We'll continue tomorrow. Tomorrow is the first public impeachment hearing. It starts at 9 o'clock Eastern, and 6 o'clock here on the West Coast. And be sure to check it out, and let's all, say a prayer or cross your fingers or whatever that Donald Trump doesn't do something really insane to try to grab the news cycle like bombing Iran, like one of our callers suggested. But anyhow, you get out there and get active, please. Democracy doesn't just happen, it needs you. So get out there, get active, tag You're It. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
We say fight back!
Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.